Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you all to our pre-commission meeting today. And we're going to have some housekeeping items, discussion of the agenda. And first question is, does anyone have any questions about today's agenda? Any of the commissioners, that is. Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Just a question. I had previously brought up the issue of street name signs on our major arterials, major intersections, and we had talked about when we might be discussing that, and I was just wondering if there was any idea about when that might be on the agenda.
Okay, I lied to you a few minutes ago when I told you I could hear you, so apparently the director heard you and he's going to answer.
Commissioner Colthorpe, Commissioner McKinney, yes, that is on the schedule. I believe it's in the next couple of weeks. I will check and come back to you, but we have posted it on the published work schedule.
Okay, good, thank you.
You bet.
All right. Any other questions? Then we'll go ahead and turn it over to the director for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, there's a joke there, by the way.
Anyway, Commissioners, good morning. Several topics to share with you today. First off, as noted, we have posted this very specific Director's Admin report as possible action items for the Commission. There are a couple of things I will be discussing with you that may require or provide you an opportunity to make a decision. However, none are required, but this does cover any discussions, decisions that you may have on those two items as we get to them later on in the report. First off, since we did miss Monday, our maintainers didn't, but a lot of other folks did, I'd like to review some of the financials that we have up front for your weekly update. First off, we are 38% through the FY. And such, we've received 50% of the planned revenue, and that was $64.2 million of the planned $128.7 million. So we're on track for revenue collection. We've expended 20% of the planned expenditures at this point in time, or $27.7 million of the, that's right, $141 million after the first budget adjustment. We are on track to execute those, barring any type of unforeseen circumstances and such. We have also received 50% of the budget HB 312 funding, which is $4.6 million of the planned $9.2 million, and we have expended 24% of those collected revenues, or $1.1 million of the $4.5 million. We have also received $9.6 million of the budgeted $22 million in impact fee investments, and we only have one scheduled bid opening this week, and that is today for facilities improvements, and the estimated budget amount will be $800,000. For small cell licenses, for your weekly update, there are 176 sites that are now installed with active, and 144 of that 176 of those sites have 5G antennas on them. There are 85 initial sites that have approved construction drawings, and we have 103 additional sites that are in pre-application phase. Again, we'll keep you posted on a weekly basis. Currently, our Development Technical Services team have 38 plan submittals and 15 development applications under review. And we have completed 55% of our yearly bridge inspection, and as of now, 99% of the bridges are still in good and acceptable shapes across Ada County. Something a little different that we are going to do, hopefully that will support all of you, but effective immediately, we'll be placing on each of your commission's specific calendar the design and public outreach dates for projects that are being planned in your district. Our goal is to best ensure that you are aware of these important milestones in order to provide you the opportunity to engage with those key neighborhood leaders to best ensuring that we are not missing something in these plans, and that from those that live in those neighborhoods that and who they consider those points being important. So again, we're going to highlight those. We're going to do a better job on making sure you know when and where those design points are, public outreach points are, again, to provide you that opportunity to speak with those folks. As an update on our standing litigation with Garden City, we have some good news. The judge has agreed with ACHD and has suggested strongly that both parties return to negotiations, which is what we had. I see the general counsel smiling over here. So both legal teams are currently working through this, and we'll keep you posted on any forward progress that we may realize going forward. As I shared with you earlier this morning, Ada County has issued another weather advisory for Thursday through Friday for 2 to 4 inches of snow. Now, strangely, this is very similar to the notification they sent out last week and such. And anyway, I'll assure you your crews are ready, and we will aggressively address this. I want to again thank our outstanding maintenance teams for the great effort, mission focus, and great spirits they all demonstrated successfully handling last week's weather challenges, from lots of snow to downed trees to specific flooding areas. I also want to again thank the public for their help in clearing storm drains. That really paid off, as we've learned in the past, and it was very tremendous of the media to continue to update the public on all the things that we were doing and our request for help. So great all the way across the board. Now, 2 items I'm going to ask to get your perspectives on Commissioner, from the Commission. First off, I'd like to address the possibility of rejoining the Idaho Association of Highway Districts at this point in time. Now, I want to make sure that the Commission is fully aware of the background on this. The Ada County Highway District left the association due to unethical, illegal, and less than stellar association operations, actions, and procedures. The former director was jailed for his actions and failed leadership. The association frequently discarded Idaho's largest highway district's recommendations, requests, and initiatives. In summary, the association's actions and goals did not reflect those of this district. Moreover, the current director did have several run-ins with leadership in the legislature, and again, did not reflect well upon the association and this district. At my recommendation, and I take full responsibility for that, the Commission elected to sever our relationship with the association several years ago. It is now several years later, and I have reached out to others and shared my thoughts that this is the time to pursue rejoining the association. Granted, I have not discussed this with the current director, but I do believe that at this time, the association, its board, and its director have greatly improved, and it is my belief that it is our mutual benefits to the association and ACHD to once again speak with one voice when it comes to issues that affect local highway districts. Commissioners, at this point, I would appreciate your thoughts on this, and as I said, I have scheduled this as an action item, so if there's a decision you'd like to make at this point, that's great. If not, I do intend to reach out to that director and have a discussion.
I'll be happy to make some comments, but I'd really like to do it last. If anyone else has some comments or questions.
Mr. President, I do.
Yes.
Thank you, Bruce, for the update. I also firmly support joining the association. I think their new director, he's got a really good vision for what he wants to take the state and how we can all be unified and support each other in this role. And I'm just really excited to hear that you're pursuing that, and I really fully support you in that.
Mary or Dave?
I too would support rejoining. It sounds like the reasons that we had for disengaging with them have been taken care of, and we're getting some positive feedback on the new direction and leadership there. So I really don't see any downside, and I think it behooves us to be part of that dialogue. So I would support that as well.
Dave?
I would have to defer to the others because, frankly, this is the first I've been aware of the situation. I don't know the history very well of what happened in the past. If this is an organization that can help us in our relationships with the legislature and in other ways, then it sounds like it would be worth doing. So, like I say, not knowing the details, I would defer to your judgment on this.
Is Jim here?
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I would also like to hear feedback after Director Wong has his meeting with this initial outreach as well. I think that would be valuable for all the commissioners to understand going forward. Thank you.
I haven't seen Jim on the list of attendees.
Oh,
There he is.
There I am. I am attending. Yes, I agree. I think we obviously you and I, Commissioner Goldthorpe, have been on the commission during this time, and we have a different views of what transpired over that the last umpteen years. But that's water under the bridge. We do have a commissioner would be designated to represent us, and I'm confident any one of the five would be fine to represent us at with the association. So I work working with the association.
Okay, I'll make my comments. First of all, I'll disclose that the current executive director and I are pretty good friends and have been for a long time. We both used to work for the same company at the same time back in the early 2000s. Anyway, I've reached out to him over the last few months to find out what his organization is thinking in terms of our participation. He and I have attended classes together for the Road Scholar and Road Master program. He's really interested in this industry. I don't think we'll have any problem getting back in. I have asked him very bluntly on what will happen if we have any issues that we disagree on, and they won't be handled the same way they used to. Our opinion will be taken probably much more seriously than it was in the past. At their offer, they made a number of appointments for me with legislators tomorrow because they had the ability to do that on the Day on the Hill event. So I'll be meeting with some of the legislators tomorrow, and they get credit for the efforts to set up those meetings. But I'm very happy that we're looking at rejoining that association, and I don't think we'll have anything like the problems that we did when we were members previously. So since we have not heard a single negative thing about this proposition, I think you can, unless we need to have a motion and a vote.
Yeah, on an action item like this, you need a vote.
Okay, I'd like to hear a motion then on rejoining the Idaho Association of Highway Districts. Someone make a motion.
I'll move that that ACHD joins the Idaho Association of Highway Districts.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Any nays? None. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you. I'll be reaching out to their director here shortly on that. The second item that I did flag for an action if needed was your discussions, your review on the recent impact fee proposed, ACHD proposed legislation for impact fees and such. As I reported to you last week, it was decided that it was not the time for this to go forward. And I brought that news back to you. The rationale from a 100,000-foot level was that currently, with all the property tax discussions that are going on, and you've read about some of those that were in the news media this morning, tax overhaul discussions that are going on, the $600 million plus state surplus that Idaho's enjoying at this point in time, that discussions for any type of change in the impact fee ordinance at this time was probably not the best timing. The other part is that there was a concern that we had included any discussions regarding transit on this. So, commissioners, I'm sure the general counsel will have an update on that. But again, I wanted to, you asked me to bring this back as to what you may or may not want to do next. And with that, general counsel.
One other issue had come up is that there's additional efforts to amend the impact fee eligibility for ambulance districts and fire facilities. And I think there's a fear that those may not go so well and that our effort may go down as well. And so there was a reluctance to pursue any more changes to the impact fee eligibility provision within the Act. But again, we're happy to do whatever the Commission wants and in those efforts.
Okay.
So, commissioners, again, the reason that we'd like to open that for your discussions, comments, concerns, and any direction you might have for us at this point in time.
Okay. I will try to ascertain from the 4 individuals I have appointments with tomorrow, maybe some other amount of detail. I am really not happy to hear that the waters might be muddied by brand new levels of participation in impact fees. Not that other organizations don't deserve to have a shot at additional revenues, but as Steve just mentioned, it's bound to mess things up for us. We have been now for years asking for a little bit of help in how we manage our revenues and how they're spent. And in the last 3 years, I can't remember that we've gotten anything as far as abilities to manage our money the way we feel that they ought to be managed. And that's discouraging to me again. I'll mention it tomorrow. I feel like their mention of the word transit in terms of available funding, they are afraid, and I believe rightfully so, that the majority of the legislature will take that one little word and run like a scalded dog with it, thinking that all we want to do is buy new buses and things like that with our highway money. I know they have the capability of telling stories like that because they've done it before. So I asked the director that if we go this route and ask for some additional help from the legislature with regards to how we spend our impact fees, that we drop the transit from it, only because of the feeling that I have that we need to succeed at something for a change, and even if it's incrementally. And so that's all I have to say. Now that Steve's talked about the other, I'm a little less optimistic. Let's put it that way. But I still think that I'll reach out. I have appointments with both heads of the transportation committees and Representative Moyle and Senator Winder tomorrow, and I'll report back how that goes.
Mr. President, I think
Yes.
that's the measured approach that we should be taking. I think once you have your meetings and come back to us with some new information, then we can better assess our position. You're right, public policy is incremental just by its nature. And I think when we look at the list, we had 11 priorities that we sent forward, and I believe 8 of them are advancing. So I think, that's a favorable outlook for us. And so I have not heard, and per our conversation, I've reached out as well and had a few conversations. I haven't heard anything that's dead in the water, but what I've heard is this is not the right time. So I think a measured approach is warranted. I think if we had sent a letter before you have those conversations, that would have been a little bit premature on our part. So, and as those of you that have been on the commission, remember we had a bill a couple years ago. We had advice that it was not the right time. It went forward. Appreciate all the efforts that went into presenting that bill. However, it did fail. So I think we need to have that dialogue. You never, nothing lost by having that conversation. So look forward to hearing what you come back with. But I do want us to keep on our radar that 8 of those 11 priorities have advanced. So I think that's good. So I think sometimes we just need to celebrate those steps as well. But again, look forward to your conversations.
And Mary, of course, you're correct with that, those 8. I do, with kind of tongue-in-cheek, look at the majority of those 8, and they were they weren't stuff that was really going to make or break us as far as things that we thought would make it look like we were successful or something. And a number of them are things that we are just being very supportive of, and which will continue to be. I just wish, as I said before, that some of the things that originate here with us would actually be taken seriously. Any other
Mr. President,
comments?
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
But I don't want everyone to be disheartened when we're just hearing perhaps this session is not the right time. That doesn't negate the fact that we can maybe approach this next session as well. So again, I look forward to your conversations. I'm glad you're going to have those, and we'll see what comes out of that. But thank you.
Well, as you know, I'm a very competitive guy, so we won't drop the ball. Yes, Jim.
Yeah, I think it's very important that this be printed. The majority of bills that get printed some don't even have hearings, because to me the first step is when people see a printed bill. It doesn't exist if there's no bill that's been printed. This is a complicated statute. I was there when it was originally adopted. It took years. There are many, many sidebars, and that this does not increase taxes in any stretch. This adds some flexibility to those folks on the ground, us, who are dealing with how to deal with an urban transportation system. And so that conversation has to start, and my view is it can only really start when you have a printed piece of legislation that can then circulate. Even if it isn't passed, that's the first step. Failure to print it this year means it might only be printed for the first time next year, or in 2 years, or in 3 years, and that's when the discussion starts. My view is that we are already 20 years behind in dealing with a transportation network that integrates all modes, and I think we need to start that conversation. I would ask that it be printed, so we can start those conversations. It doesn't mean that I know there's many moving parts up there, but having a bill printed really helps to initiate those conversations, and frankly helps then the process of helping to educate legislators. How does the impact fee statute work? Because if you were to quiz them today, I'm sure they would all have different notions of how it operates, and then we could disabuse them of misconceptions of all of the sidebars, because the way in which the statute is written and the way in which we then apply it is extremely narrow, and it just doesn't provide us the kind of tools that we need. And this is such a small shift, and anyway, I would really encourage us to support having the bill at least printed.
Thanks, Jim.
Mr. President?
Yes.
So when I was on the, talking to thousands of voters, so many people were very passionate about transit, very passionate about having more funding for community projects and bike and ped facilities. And I hear Jim, and I hear Mary, and I hear Kent, and I think obviously timing is really tricky, but I just say it out there, I would support the letter because I think we really need to secure this for bike and pedestrian facilities. We are way long overdue in having more funding for these types of projects. I'm thinking of Garden City in particular. They desperately need more funding for their projects. I'm thinking of all these different communities that really need this. And transit is unfortunately not very appetizing at the state level. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to really explain what it is and what our vision is and how this impacts all of us and how transit in the right way could be a potential additional solution on the table. So I'll defer to my more senior members on the commission about whether or not to put the letter forward in terms of timing, if that's the right approach. But I do support taking the word transit off for now, although it does pain me a great deal.
Thank you. I know it does.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Mr. President, I certainly support the comments that I've heard. And I would have no objection to doing a letter. I just want to wait to do the letter until after you have those pertinent conversations, because I think you will garner some new knowledge or some information that would help us in crafting a letter should we decide to put one forward. So I have no objection to a letter. It's just doing it right now before you have those meetings.
Right. Thank you. David? Drinking out of the fire hose again, right?
Right. Well, I'm inclined to agree, Mr. President, with your general assessment of how to move forward with this. And whatever we do, we need to move it forward so that the impact fee issue can be improved from where it is now. So I agree with what you're planning.
Thank you. I expect tomorrow's conversations to all be very open and honest because of the conversations that wound up not doing any good the last couple of years. And my and other people's response to that inability to make any progress. So I expect it to be a good discussion tomorrow, and I'll have something to report and make that report before next week. Okay, I don't think we're going to do anything till after you've heard from me.
Well,
Mr. President, I have a different question on the 8 bills that Mary was mentioning, if you don't mind. So I was part of the presentation that you gave to our legislators, Director Wong, on the different policy items that we were pursuing at the legislature. And there were a few that were from the older commission that I personally don't feel aligned with, and that weren't truly, I feel like, endorsed or shared by the current commission. And in particular, I'm deeply concerned about Senate Bill 1106. It's saying that, we would have a veto power to not align with our land use agencies. And I think that goes against all the things that I've heard from our staff about the work that we're trying to accomplish and the collaboration that we're trying to usher in, especially as our growth is just increasing exponentially. We need to be able to work together, and I just don't support that bill. So I'm just wondering what's the best approach if we can potentially have it on an action item to see if the full commission would support not pursuing that policy item, or if that's a different discussion or a different option to pursue that.
Here comes the answer.
I will let the general counsel, because he about jumped out of his seat right there.
know you've asked a good question when that happens.
For the record, Steve Price, General Counsel. Oh, thank you. Just in terms of the schedule, this has not been scheduled for a hearing yet. It's been printed. If the commission directs us, we most certainly can withdraw the bill. I would like to do that prior to us having a hearing on it, and I can make that happen. I can work with our lobbyists and chairman of the local government committee, Senator Rice. This issue, though, is really just an extension of what the State Transportation Department has relating to essential facilities. This really does not involve our collaboration on many of the other efforts that that we do with our partners and in all facets of the transportation area. This really relates to sometimes the urgency to get essential facilities done without the long process of a land use application and conditions. That these are really just compliance facilities, something that's in response to a federal or state mandate that we have, and that is exactly what the State Transportation Department, that's how they employ it. We don't have to necessarily, the commission has a lot of control as to whether they want to pursue this. In any event, whatever facility, we most certainly would, under the act, we would be working with the land use agency in advance before there's ever a decision to go forward. This most certainly issue has come up as a result of the litigation with Garden City. It is litigation, but it's really a judicial appeal that we've been involved in, and this really just, of course, the salt shed is something that the EPA has required, is something that we need, and if we don't get it extended, it's going to be a great cost to the taxpayers for us to relocate that facility in the neighborhood of at least $300,000 to $500,000. So, and it will have a negative impact on our ability to perform snow operations as efficiently as we currently do. So that was the reason why this was reviewed with the current commission. I believe in some of your first meetings, the director went over those. But whatever piece of legislation that we do, it's at the will of the majority of the commission. And we are most certainly, whatever direction we get, we will execute that. And if you'd like us to have this held back until you've had a chance to have the commission weigh in again, happy to do that.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. I guess my big question and concern is, I understand the piece about the salt shed and leveling and making sure that we're on an even playing field with ITD in terms of simplifying legislation. I totally understand that. But I think it's not very clear from the actual bill itself that that's, from what I've heard from external partners and people that are reviewing this bill, it just looks like it's an affront to being able to collaborate with our land use agencies.
Well, I think if you look at the bill, I think it's pretty clear. This is really just an extension, and I can't imagine that we would go forward without talking with our land use partners, but it gives us the assurance that those essential facilities will be authorized. So I understand your point.
Okay. If yes, Jim.
I would echo the concerns of Commissioner Pickering. The language of essential facilities, I underestimated what that meant. I think we all understand LUPA doesn't apply to the highway district, and that decisions that we make have negative externalities those could be shifted onto the entity on which LUPA does apply. I didn't have any heartburn over the language, but have gotten some input from the Chamber of Commerce and from some local officials that says, will this aggravate our relationship? And it's like, well, it might, I don't know. So let's have that conversation, because I think the important is that every decision we make has some negative externalities over where we make them. And so we have to figure out ways that it's not like, well, that's not our problem because LUPA doesn't apply to us, and here's even clearer language that it doesn't. So I think we need to have more thoughtful conversations with our local government partners before we push ahead on this bill. I think it can be resolved either with this current language and an understanding, or with some additional language. But I would like to see it, mostly because that issue has been now raised with our partners, and that relationship is very, very important, I think, to the taxpayers as well as to us.
Okay, we've got another comment coming from Mr. Price.
Just so you know, the commissioners and Mr. President, the process in which we pursue legislation is a lengthy process, and especially in terms of wording. We meet with the legislators, we meet with the chairs of the committees, we review the wording with them, we take their edits. In fact, a lot of the legislation has been, we take their input, we listen, and they provide us guidance on what they think they can get passed in their committee. And in this one, it was the dialogue resulted in the current wording. With them, less wording is better. Again, this is just the authorization. It doesn't mean the commission itself or any local highway jurisdiction has to, follow this. This just gives them the option whenever they see they need to get a facility done. But again, I don't see that this is going to have a negative impact. It hasn't had a negative impact with the relationship that ITD has had in the past. It works well. It's only an extraordinary use for us to not have to follow the myriad number of zoning ordinances to get these type of facilities. It's very difficult to comply with local zoning ordinances for a lot of these transportation type facilities. They're light industrial by nature, and in the areas that we have currently the facilities, they would be non-compliant. And so that's the difficulty that we face. But again, this was something that was brought up based upon a current situation, and the prior commission, this was a decision on going forward. If there are concerns about language, we are contacted by any of those parties throughout the legislative process, and we can work on amended language at that time. So that's really and Commissioner Hansen knows it better than most as a past legislator. A lot of the dialogue just starts as you go forward with the legislation, and there's always time for edits. But with this language that is in the current bill, this is what was, in terms of feedback, was provided to us is the right language for what we're trying to do.
Thanks,
Mr.
Steve.
President?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just ask that we go ahead and, just like I said with the previous bill, once you've printed something, then conversations can start with the rest of the world. I would ask that we work with the Association of Counties and Association of Cities to make sure that any concerns that they have from their members is addressed and resolved, so that they can come on board and support this. And I would feel much more comfortable if they could. Thank you.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Mary, Dave? By that I meant I'm okay with this going forward. the situation that precipitated it was, in my words and my words only, kind of an insult. And, we don't have to do anything negative, even with this bill if it's passed. I mean, I think that from the standpoint of what we're trying to accomplish with this bill, I have not seen this body act in any kind of an egregious or vindictive fashion with our partners, and I doubt that that would happen without some kind of an uproar. So I'm, again, just like Jim said, and like what Mr. Price said, I'm okay with this moving forward.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I agree. I'm in favor of moving forward. I think anything we can do to help clarify to the legislators what the intent, the purpose, and the outcome of is intended for this bill could be helpful. But let's move forward in any case.
Thank you. Mary?
I concur.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. President, I just want to reassure the commission that we most certainly will be working with the associations for the counties and cities and any other interested parties. That's what the process is for, and we'll most certainly be reaching out to them if we already haven't. I don't know what Jason and his crew have done, but I can't imagine that they haven't, and they're probably talking about it right now. But in any event, we most certainly will work with them. That is part of being a good partner and addressing any concerns that they have.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I was just going to mention to Mr. Price that when he finds out how these discussions are going and any sort of input we're getting, if they could bring that back to the commission so everybody is aware.
You know
Thank
he
you.
will.
Thank you, Mary. That
I
sounds
know
good.
he will.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. President, it's now 12:11.
Yes, it's we're tardy, and I don't have a note from my mother. So with that, we'll begin by the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll start our meeting. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll begin by entertaining a motion to accept the agenda.
I'll move to accept the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor, aye? Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed, nay? The ayes have it, the motion passes. Now we'll go on to the consent agenda. Items on this consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion, and there won't be any separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless otherwise noted. We have one item on the consent agenda, and unless somebody wants to have that moved, which are our minutes, if someone wants to have that moved to the regular agenda, go ahead and make that motion. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Mr. President, I move we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Good. The motion passes. We'll go to our regular agenda. I just didn't want to embarrass Stacy. Yes, I know. There is nothing on our regular agenda, so we will now move to public communications. Has anyone asked to speak? Yes.
Miss Lisa Brady.
Lisa, you are welcome to be here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great. Thank you very much. My name for the record is Lisa Brady. I reside at 1506 North 12th Street. I am the director of the Treasure Valley Safe Routes to School program. And I wanted to highlight something today that's on your work session agenda, which is having to do with setting speed limits. As you probably all have been, I've been in a raft of Zoom and Teams meetings this morning, and one of those meetings included our West Data Safety Busing Committee meeting, and we have several more of these meetings coming up, but one thing that came out today just really strongly was having to add safety busing to schools that shouldn't have to have safety busing due to road expansion and the speed limits that have been increased on those 5-lane arterials. One of those specifically is Frontier Elementary. Another one is Joplin. These are near the nice new roadways that are on Cloverdale, and we built attached sidewalk and attached bike lanes and have minimal crossings, and we are seeing an increase in the cost of safety busing for this region, and I put in a request to the State Department of Education for the cost of safety busing in our area now. And I would like to, when you go into that work session, I would like you to think about what increase in speed limits means when we're talking about how many people are going a certain speed versus what the actual land uses are and the ramifications of making decisions like this. It's really hard for me to, as a safe routes educator and an encourager for people biking and walking and trying to increase community health, decrease costs of transportation that we all pay for, and make it work when we have things like this happening. And the facility, particularly on Cloverdale, does have conflicting speed limit messaging, but the same roadway design. So one section is 40, one is 35, some of it's 45. I could be wrong about the 45, but some of it's 40. And so as you go into that particular discussion today, I will be watching also, but I just really want to put that information out there for you, that there is a cost that isn't acknowledged, and that's the cost of safety busing and children's health. So thank you very much, and that's all I had to say.
Thank you for that appropriate and timely reminder. That is a concern that I have, and that is a concern that I use to develop questions every time we talk about speed limits. And as we go into this work session, I'm sure you'll hear at least one of us comment about the futility or lack thereof of our partners allowing for some of the changes in speed limits that I'm sure you and I would like to see in those particular geographic areas and circumstances. But we're going to talk about that. Trust me. Thank you. Unless there's anyone else that would like to speak for public comment, the meeting is adjourned, and we will move into our work sessions.
So our first work session is with CCDC, with Amy.
Yes, thank you. I am going to pull up my presentation here, share screen. Just confirm that you all can see the appropriate screen before I get started.
It looks good.
Okay. So good afternoon, President Goldthorpe and Commissioners. My name is Amy Dimble, and I am CCDC's project manager for the Linen Blocks on Grove Street project. Today, I will be providing a brief introduction of the project. I'll discuss upcoming public and stakeholder engagement opportunities, and also be reviewing existing infrastructure deficiencies and discuss opportunities for ACHD to partner with CCDC on this project to meet the goals of both agencies. So Linen Blocks on Grove Street project looks at the west end of Grove Street, adjacent to Boise's downtown core, with focus given to Grove Street public right-of-way between 10th and 16th Streets.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm having a really difficult time hearing you.
Oh, that's not good. Is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll just hold it up closer. CCDC's current capital improvements plan has allocated funding in fiscal year 2022 for infrastructure improvements to Grove Street. Grove Street is an important corridor of local commerce with many opportunities for catalytic transformation and meaningful investment to address some of these infrastructure deficiencies. So some of the potential public investments could include improvements to streets, sidewalks, stormwater infrastructure, lighting, public art elements, enhancements to the tree canopy, installation of street furnishings, public spaces, as well as parking infrastructure. Such amenities would draw more people and economic activity to the area and really be a catalyst for more private investment and an increase of the downtown tax base. So the visioning process will directly influence the use of these urban renewal funds. This project is an opportunity for ACHD to partner with CCDC to deliver a transformative project that meets both agencies' plans and objectives in this area. In December 2020, CCDC and community engagement consultant Agnew Beck began conducting interviews with key community stakeholder groups, including public partners such as ACHD. CCDC shared background information, we discussed efficiencies, opportunities, and goals for the area. We've done initial outreach to property owners, did some door knocking, and currently have an online survey open to hear from the Grove Street businesses. Later this month, we will have the first of 3 work group sessions with key stakeholders and then expand the visioning process to the general public with the launch of the first public survey the first week of March. The intent of the visioning process is to assess infrastructure needs, make sure they're in alignment with public partners, identify community needs and how they could be met in this area, as well as bring forward and recognize ways to incorporate the area's history and culture. The visioning process will help direct public investments as well as influence and inspire private development. We'll use the feedback and input collected from public partners such as ACHD and the City of Boise, as well as input from those who live, work, own a business, and enjoy spending time in this area to articulate the final vision report for the public improvements on Grove Street. Working together, ACHD and CCDC staff have identified opportunities to collaborate on ACHD planned maintenance. The following infrastructure deficiencies exist on Grove Street within the project area. Over 3,200 lineal feet of sidewalk needing accessibility improvements, 16 curb ramp locations, and additional non-compliant driveways needing accessibility improvements. The Grove Street roadway surface pavement condition index, PCI, is 68 to 70 and was originally part of DBIP, but was removed due to this upcoming CCDC project. There's also an opportunity to address stormwater deficiencies and promote green stormwater infrastructure. Grove Street currently has a bike lane on it and is part of the regional low-stress bikeway network, and this project will coordinate with ACHD to ensure that the bike facilities meet ACHD's roadways to bikeways plan recommendations, and that we're also meeting ACHD bike and pedestrian performance measures as we move forward. So this slide outlines the overall project timeline. We kicked off the vision planning phase in October 2020, and we'll have a final vision report complete by June 2021. From there, we'll bring on a design team to come up with a concept design by fall of 2021, and then continue to advance the project to final design by spring of 2022. Construction is tentatively scheduled to start summer of 22. This graphic further illustrates the public outreach process that's currently underway. We have completed the first fact-finding phase and are now in the visioning workshop phase. From there, the information and input received will be summarized and packaged into the final reinvestment strategy and implementation plan, and then the last step is to actually implement those recommended improvements. CCDC desires for the Linden Blocks and Grove Street project to be a collaborative, multi-agency infrastructure project that will incorporate ACHD's planned maintenance on Grove Street, as well as further the economic prosperity of this unique neighborhood. ACHD staff has been invited to participate in upcoming work group meetings and will be an important stakeholder and hopefully partner as the project advances. CCDC will return to ACHD Commission in summer of 21 to present public outreach findings along with the final vision report. Staff also anticipates that the Commission will be taking formal action in the approval of the concept design in fall of 2021. We'll then continue to advance the project into final design and again anticipate construction occurring in 2022. that completes my formal presentation, and I'm happy to stand for any questions that anyone has at this time.
Thank you. I have a comment. I am really appreciative of the fact that you're starting to work on this. For 6 years, I've been incredibly proud of the average PCI that Ada County Highway District has had throughout the county. And every single time we get a new map showing the PCI and where we need to make improvements and stuff, I look down in the downtown area and see that glaring section where I didn't know what the level was, but I appreciate you telling us, and I'm looking forward to seeing that improve greatly. Thank you.
Mr. President, I have a couple questions. Thank you for the presentation. Could you go back to the diagram that you had of all the different outreach? Thank you, the public outreach approach. Perfect. So I'm just curious, are you engaging, obviously, because that corridor has a lot of businesses, it's got, it's adjacent, if it's not on, has residential areas. Like, are you inviting people that live, work, and play that are along that corridor, or can you tell me more about the audience that you plan to engage with?
Yeah, so as we started, we did door knocking to actual business along the corridor, and then those who weren't able to reach in person, we sent out an online survey, which is open until March 1st. A lot of those same businesses have been invited to our work group sessions, so we'll have 3 of those. We'll also be, as our public outreach kicks off, we'll be working with neighborhood associations to reach residents and renters in the area. I think it's really important to make sure that it's not just property owners that are getting reached, that it's also renters. So we'll be working directly with those neighborhood associations to get the message out, and they'll help. We'll do some mailings, postcards mostly, to reach those residents.
Perfect, thank you.
And then also social media blasts have been really effective on prior public outreach.
So just since I'm new, kind of a dumb question. So does ACHD partner with the outreach piece, or does CCDC take the lead on that and then we just have staff attend? Kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, in previous projects, so I was the project manager on the 11th Street Bikeway, ACHD helped push out that message. If we had a survey, ACHD would help collaborate in just spreading the word. CCDC would be taking the lead in putting together all materials, but there's an opportunity if ACHD would be willing to help promote the project and the survey, but there's definitely an opportunity for that.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much. Great presentation. I think this is a great example of where collaborative work done to enhance the value and the resilience and the strength of a particular neighborhood just returns value back to this agency and to others that rely on the property tax. That's so critical because obviously any kind of infrastructure needs to be maintained, and if there's increased value that comes back, it really enhances the value of our tax base. And our tax, we live and die by the value of our tax base because that's what we can and can't do to maintain. There's issues of course, I'm sure you'll address it because I've seen it addressed in other projects. The street's really wide. The only thing that tends to slow people down when they're driving through is the fact that they're going to hit a traffic light, so they can only go a block at a time. And also the presence of bike lanes and parking, so there's activity on there. So I look forward to the way in which you design and think about the design of the street that allows people to move by all modes. And it'd be interesting to see whether that, obviously those designs would be targeted at the speed of probably, 20, 25 miles an hour, which is consistent with a district like this. And then the last is the one question that always arises is, the access points. Obviously, we're about transportation throughout the entire county, that it can be really cool within that district. But I think part of this project also has to be very clear about what the access points are for people to come to this district. This is obviously a district that's going to prioritize walking and biking. And so being able to walk and bike to the district across 9th Street, across Front and Myrtle, across 16th. So that needs to be part of it so we can see how people get to it. I'm sure you understand that's how they come and bring their money, because otherwise, if the only way you can access it, or the safest way to access it is by car, you then have to have a whole bunch of parking, which I'm sure that's not what your goal is, to build a lot of parking structures in there. So I just sort of lay that last point out as find it and get an assurance that the access points from outside the district is a key component to this planning process.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Commissioner Hanson. We've definitely heard on the public outreach and the business outreach that we've done already about those tricky access points and some of those unsafe crossings. So those are on our radar, and we'll really be looking to accommodate all modes in this corridor, but really enhancing those pedestrian and bike facilities that are in dire need. So we'll be hearing more from people on what their priorities are and how that allocates to the street use, but we're really trying to make this a prime example of complete streets. So looking forward to diving into it more as we get going.
Okay, unless there is another comment, you have my thanks for this presentation, and we are really looking forward to seeing this roll out. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks, Amy.
We will now go into item number 2 on our work sessions, which is the integrated 5-year work plan, the process. And Christy Henselman is going to be the presenter, and we appreciate her being here.
Absolutely, President Goldthorpe, I'm happy to be here. So good afternoon, Mr. President and Commissioners. For the record, Christy Henselman, Planning and Projects Department. Yeah, do I do that with Mark? Okay. Okay, so I'm here today to review the process for the development of the integrated 5-year work plan. First, it's important to understand how the integrated 5-year work plan works in conjunction with the region's overall planning framework. This diagram illustrates how planning is accomplished and how the different jurisdictions are connected. It starts with the cities and county who establish the land use for Ada County. This feeds into the Compass Regional Transportation Plan, the Communities in Motion 2.0, or 2040 2.0, sorry, which is a regional long-range transportation plan for Ada and Canyon counties. From that, we have the development of our strategic plan that informs our asset management, our ADA plan, our bike master plan, our neighborhood plans, and our capital improvement plan. These all flow into the development of our integrated 5-year work plan that is updated annually with our budget. And the first 2 years of the integrated 5-year work plan are tied directly to that annual budget. So what is the 5-year work plan? The 5-year work plan is updated annually to identify the projects that ACHD anticipates building over the next 5 years. It outlines the concept, design, right-of-way, and construction for some 400 plus projects and programs. Projects are included in the plan and as a result of community input, as well as safety, scheduling, and a number of technical factors. The document allows elected officials, staff, partner agencies, and the public to work in a coordinated fashion to implement those projects. It is also how our neighborhood plans, bike master plan, and capital improvement plans are implemented. These are the primary programs that make up the integrated 5-year work plan. They include our bridge program, which is both major and minor bridges, our capital maintenance program, capital investment program, which includes our arterial roadway and intersections, our community programs, which includes our bikeways, community projects, safe routes to school, and safe sidewalk programs, our environmental program, which includes stormwater projects, and our traffic safety and operational projects. In the 21-25 program, there were 409 projects programmed and totaled over $974 million. So how are projects selected? Project selection is identified through a variety of outreach efforts. Project requests are identified by the public through the adoption of the neighborhood plans. Currently, there's 15 to date. These include sidewalks, crossings, and bikeway requests. Bikeways that have been identified in the Bike Master Plan. These include our low-stress bikeway network. We also solicit project requests from our partner agencies. They include the cities, counties, school district, Boise State University, and this year we've added Valley Regional Transit to our list and look forward to their insight. Additionally, we also have an annual coordination meeting with ITD to identify upcoming joint projects between our facilities. We reach out to the public through social media outlets as well as our website. We also receive projects through the community programs application process. Once received, projects are prioritized, evaluated for feasibility, and eventually added to the integrated 5-year work plan, pending available funding. Unfortunately, this is not a quick process. So prioritization. Once project requests are received, we add them to our system and they are prioritized based on a multitude of criteria. We look at whether a partner agency requested the project. Is it located near a school or civic facility or in a transit corridor? Is the project identified in neighborhood plan? Are there existing pedestrian facilities? If so, is it a complete network or are there critical connections missing? Is this an identified low-stress bikeway or will it connect multiple bikeways? Additionally, the criteria we look at for pedestrian crossings is different than that we look at for a roadway or intersection project. Once projects are ranked, we utilize the information to inform our decision-making process to decide which projects are scoped each year, as well as what projects could be moved into the new program. We look at the overall points, what the type of facility it is, how they were ranked by our partner agencies, available funding, and project costs. Before a project can be added to the integrated 5-year work plan, it needs to be scoped in the field to determine how much a project will cost and whether it's a viable project. We also look at the extents of the project. For example, the request may be for a crossing, but during the scoping process, we see that the project will also need sidewalk connections and ADA ramp upgrades. Each year we scope approximately 40 to 50 projects, and staff will be coming back to the Commission on April 7th for a project prioritization work session. Over the next few slides, I'll be reviewing the different ways that the public can get involved in the process. One way is through the neighborhood planning process. To date, as I said, we have 15 neighborhood plans that have been adopted. This year we have 2 plans that will be developed and adopted, the Meridian South and the CUNA neighborhood plans. Next year will be the Barber Valley Plan, and we'll revisit the Boise Central Bench Plan. This plan will begin the 10-year rotation for review. Of the adopted plans, 287 projects have been completed, with another 145 programmed in the 21-25. And of course, we always hope to add more in this update. Another way to get involved would be for the public to reach out to our partner agencies. When the cities, counties, school districts join in supporting the request, it can help elevate the importance of a project making it into the integrated 5-year work plan. We've developed a web page that has email links and phone numbers to those partner agency staff for them to reach out to. Another option would be the submittal of a community programs application. The goal is to provide citizens and neighborhood groups with a clear and direct way to request enhanced projects in the public right-of-way. This application offers citizens an opportunity to address wanted improvements in their neighborhood, particularly those that provide pedestrian and bicycle safety, mobility, and connectivity, such as sidewalks. Lastly, we encourage the public to reach out to the ACHD commissioners. The ACHD Commission webpage contains an interactive map to determine which commission district the public lives in, as well as their contact information. This is a timeline of the integrated 5-year work plan process. As I said, this is a year-long process that we started in October. We sent kickoff letters to our partner agencies in November and met with quite a few of them as well. Tomorrow night will be our first public open house for the 22-26 integrated 5-year work plan. And as a reminder, this is a hybrid meeting with some limited seating available. We're asking the public to submit project requests by March 12th. And around mid-July, we'll have our second public open house that will coincide with the release of our initial draft. This will start the comment period that will run for 1 month into August. It's anticipated that the budget will go before the Commission for adoption on August 25th and the 5-year work plan for adoption on September 22nd. Upcoming, these are the next steps in our process. I've highlighted the upcoming work session with the Commission. Our goal is to come to the Commission often throughout the process for your input. They include the programming targets on March 3rd in a few weeks, project prioritization on April 7th, budget, integrated 5-year work plan, revenue on May 5th, and the initial draft on July 14th. And then we review public and agency comment review from that initial draft on September 1st. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Christy. I have a question.
Of course.
And that is having to do with the community programs application that the public can consider and send to us. Would it be possible to put that on our website with a little bit of an explanation and perhaps highlight it a little bit so that people can find it very quickly on the front page? And I know we've had some version of this presentation about 4 times since October. And I mean, I say that because I'm grateful. And I don't believe there's really any excuse for anyone not knowing that their opinions and are listened to and that we're available to take their advice. But maybe we could put something like that impressed me yesterday was Commissioner Hansen put something out on his website, and I saw it on Facebook, where he talked about the 5-year integrated work plan and the budget hearing and people getting their, if we could put something out on Nextdoor and on our website and other ways so that, again, people will have no excuse to say we didn't know.
Mr. President, we work closely with our communications department.
Yep.
And the meeting we have tomorrow, as well as the webpage that has our community programs information, those are all sent out through Twitter, Nextdoor, Facebook. Those posts have all gone out. We also have a list of stakeholder groups that we contact that include all of our neighborhood planning groups as well as our advisory committees. So we do a pretty significant outreach for our public open house, as well as that webpage that gives you all of the options on how to get involved. But I'm more than happy to.
No, that's awesome. I didn't know it was quite that elaborate.
It is, always.
And we're usually the ones that get the blame for someone not knowing. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Any
Mr.
other
President?
comments?
Yes. Christy, thank you for this presentation. Each time I learn more about the integrated 5-year work plan, all the different steps. So I just really appreciate that. I would echo Commissioner Goldthorpe's thing about having it be on the front page, because it's just so much easier to just get to it rather than having to scroll and trying to find it with all our websites. So that would be fantastic. I was just really curious on the community programs application process. How does the commission is it like a tally? I mean, how do you incorporate these applications into the whole process of projects?
Well, I'll be coming back to, so when we receive a project request, we do put that in our system and we take a look at what they are requesting. If I don't smack the mic a few more times. And when we come back to you during that prioritization, we give you a list of what agencies have requested, what the public has requested, and how those are kind of vetting out. So we will come back to you with that information, yes.
Perfect. And then I see that tomorrow is the budget open house number 1. How many do we have in total?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pickering, we have two. We have one it's kind of the kickoff, and that will happen tomorrow. And then once we've received all of those project requests and we go through the prioritization process, then we put together, and it's a lengthy process, and we put together our initial draft. We come back in July and release that. So we'll have another public open house when we release that initial draft, which opens up another month-long comment period, or over a month-long
Okay.
comment period. So there's two public hearings.
Okay, so
And then as far as a quick link to that page for them submitting, it is available on our front page
Good.
under the quick links.
Perfect. And then, what was my other one? I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the commission?
Mr. President?
Yes,
Yeah, I just want to thank Christy. Every year it gets better. One of the great tools online now, because in the past we didn't have that wonderful interactive map, is really helpful. The one thing I just want to really appreciate the staff. Last year I did it with staff. Between the time when we've got all the public requests are supposed to be due, and the city requests and the school district and everything, and the time when we meet to discuss prioritization, it's helpful to know what, having talked to the neighbors, usually individual neighborhood associations, people have organized in the neighborhoods and find out, well, it either didn't get in, somebody dropped the ball there, but it's still important, or it was sent to the city, and then the city sort of absorbed it into their priorities, and it sort of didn't reappear in ours. So I really appreciated last year being able to go over. Ryan spent a lot of time with me, and I'll be asking it again between the time when the public requests are due, so that's kind of the last of the input dates, and the time when we meet in April. So sort of go through individually, not as a whole commission, but just individually with the commissioners, to say what's in front of you, what input have you got, and what didn't make it in, so we can say, we sort of characterize those as what a commissioner directive, but really they were from the neighbors. They just didn't somehow make it through the bureaucratic processes. And my heart goes out to those neighborhood associations, because they're all volunteer, and it seems like every week somebody else is being sort of be a president of this association or that association. It's like, who's got this information? And oh yeah, we got this neighborhood plan. So just helping them walk through that process is so important. And whenever they call you and get information, it's so helpful. So it's so empowering too, because otherwise they feel disempowered. So thank you. And I know in March, each of us will probably be calling you and saying, hey, did this project make it in? Did this update to a project that's already on there make it in? How do we adjust this to address those? The other is, of course, it's the excellent update to the federal capital maintenance, so that's much more integrated into project improvements. It's not just about the pavement, it's about doing project improvements at the same time. So that really helps. And frankly, I look at that map multiple times a day, a week, and it's tremendously helpful. So thank you.
thank you. Any other comments?
I just have one quick question.
All right.
Christy, I'm going to be meeting with two of my neighborhood associations in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Could we talk offline about like a pared down version of this presentation that I could share with them to say, hey, this is what the process is and that sort of bit?
Mr. President, Madam, or Commissioner Pickering, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
I can vouch for the fact that our staff prepares wonderful presentations for us to give to groups. Christy and Gary have accompanied me with on at least one of those.
Yes.
Anything else? If not, we will go ahead and go to item number 3, which is speed limits, how ACHD determines them. And Joshua Sack is going to, has drawn the short straw to go ahead and give that presentation.
Short straw or long straw?
I don't know. I just sat through a class on that last year, and I didn't bring my calculator on purpose.
Mr. President, is this the presentation that was given to the Pedestrian Advisory Committee a couple weeks ago? That was excellent, by the way.
I couldn't hear you, Jim. I'm sorry.
Oh, Josh did a great job doing a presentation to the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and I think several of us were listening in on that. Is this the same presentation?
Commissioner Hanson, this is going to be very similar to that presentation, yes.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thanks.
All right, appreciate it. I'm going to first start off by saying that I visited the dentist this morning, and the first thing they told me was that, well, I hope you're not giving a presentation the next couple hours. I said, well, sorry about that. I guess I don't listen to my dentist very well. But if I lisp, it's the Novocaine. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about speed limits in Ada County, a little information about how we set speed limits here. It's not really different from kind of a standard practice throughout the nation. Some of the characteristics, some of the considerations that we use, we're certainly looking at things like the roadway characteristics, adjacent land use. Are we talking a downtown area? Is it more rural in nature? Is it more suburban in nature? We're looking at pedestrian and parking activity. Is there on-street parking? Is there off-street parking? Are there bike lanes? We're looking at crash experience. We're looking at sort of the reported history that ITD has a database that they kind of make sure that they take into account all of the crashes that are reported by the local agency. We're looking at the 85th percentile speed. That's a number that you're going to hear a lot. 85th percentile speed is the speed at which kind of the 85% of traffic is traveling at or below. There's also the pace speed. These are kind of numbers and terms that are sort of bandied about within sort of the realm of setting speed limits. The pace speed is sort of your block of 10 miles an hour where you have the most folks traveling, most drivers you're going to see within that. And I'll show you a couple examples in a little bit. Traffic signal coordination is also kind of a significant part of that, and that's going to take place in more of a downtown environment. It's sort of the little secret that we have the ability to sort of manipulate time and space when it comes to certainly one-way streets within a downtown. We can progress drivers at a certain speed that is appropriate for conditions. Certainly segment consistency. Our law enforcement partners that we partner with, and they kind of let us know when there are segments in question that are either consistent or not consistent. And certainly driver expectations goes a long way. Drivers need to feel comfortable at a given speed. So when we start to plot these things, this is what you get. On the bottom axis, you're looking at sort of a driving speed. On the y-axis, you're looking at the number of drivers. So this is what we call a normal distribution. The joys of the normal distribution, this is what your professor in college or your high school teacher would say, hey, we're grading on a curve. This is what they're talking about. So it's not just applicable, certainly, to speed studies. It's going to be applicable in a lot of different realms of statistics and a way of accumulating data. The average speed is what we generally sort of see sort of at that peak of the curve. These are real values. We don't always know the distribution, but there are finite points within this distribution. So at the 85th percentile speed, there's that 85% are traveling at or below, 15% are generally traveling higher. That pace is that block of speeds, again, where you're seeing the 10-mile-an-hour band. We want to see this band as tight as possible, as many drivers as possible within this 10-mile-an-hour band. This gives you an example of what we actually see. This is our pretty standard tally sheet for speeds. We'll send a tech or an analyst out to measure some data, and look, it fits nicely. So this is.
They can do that manually as well, can't they?
They can.
With the speed gun and the whole 9 yards?
We'll get there.
Okay. I've done that.
Told you.
Yeah, light bulb moment. You're like, oh.
So in terms of methodology, how do we conduct these speed studies? So we call a spot speed study. We're going to take a radar gun out there. It's based on a statistical sample. So we're going to send one of our techs, one of our analysts out there, and they'll be out there for a half hour, 40 minutes, an hour or so, gathering this information during non-peak flow. We want to get kind of a good measure of what traffic is actually doing in non-peak conditions. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. When it comes to sort of more rural applications, we're trying to get a good sample, but we don't want our tech out there for 2 or 3 hours collecting all this information to get that information. So Oftentimes we will use pneumatic tubes. So those are the tubes you see on the road. Sometimes there's one tube, sometimes there's two tubes, and they're spaced appropriately so that we can collect both speed and speed and volume information. But if we're primarily concerned about speed, you're going to see two tubes on the road. We're going to use those when we get a request for traffic calming on neighborhood streets. That gives us kind of the best, widest sampling of data, usually over a multi-day period. We'll also use those in locations where peak hours lie. So somebody has a concern down on Swan Falls or Strobel down in South County. We're not going to send a tech out there for 3 or 4 hours. We're probably going to set some tubes out. It's not like you're setting it and forgetting it, but we will set it there. We'll check on it, make sure that the battery is okay. We'll come back every couple of days to make sure it's actually collecting the data that we want. So it's kind of gives a nice flexibility in being able to collect data right away, but also collect a robust sample to make appropriate decisions.
Hey, Josh, I have a quick question. So go back one slide. So I see that you're saying speed study, and I've heard a lot about traffic studies. So is a speed study a component of an overall traffic study, or are there other components within a traffic study that exclude speed?
Commissioner Pickering, that's a good question. So when you're talking, we sort of use these terms interchangeably, and they really are. So if we're talking about speed study, that is specific to speeds. A traffic study is going to take into account a lot more than just speeds. It's going to look at a lot of other factors associated. So there are some differences, but there certainly is some overlap between them as well.
Okay.
So when do we conduct speed study? Well, certainly by request, and that's perhaps a flippant answer, but it's true. I mean, our police partners will come out and say, we've had a lot of requests from either neighborhood residents or we've seen some activity. We're concerned about kind of an appropriate speed limit on a given section of road. So we'll go out, we'll do a speed study, we'll provide that data back to them kind of for their information. We also get a lot of requests from citizens, of course. They'll call in and say, hey, I'm concerned about, Cloverdale between Victory and Overland, for example. That's kind of one of the most recent ones. That's been an interesting discussion, if you will. And certainly we don't always get a request to lower speed limits. We get a request to raise speed limits because they feel that traffic is traveling at a speed that is not appropriately set. So we'll go out there, we'll collect the data and report back. We certainly do so also with ACHD projects. We'll collect the before data, and then we'll come back after it's done, after the project is complete, and collect an after data, and because we have to set it at something beforehand. We can't just randomly select a number. We try to find a number that we think is appropriate, and oftentimes we're pretty close, but sometimes we need to make adjustments based on sort of what drivers are doing on a new segment. It's a brand new condition, so it behooves us to sort of evaluate that post fact. So if we're talking about driver behaviors, this is information that's kind of from a relatively old study, but it's still fairly relevant. So on the bottom axis, what we see is sort of a bunch of different studies that was collected by FHWA, where we look at sort of the change in posted speed limit based on either negative or positive. And on the vertical axis, you're going to see the actual realized change in the 85th percentile speed. So what we find is that when you start changing speed limits, just either minus 15 or minus 20, up to either plus 15 or plus 10, we don't actually see a huge amount of change. The average change within that tends to be within that kind of 0 to 1 mile an hour. And that's usually what we find too when it comes to collecting the information sort of on a very discrete level too. In terms of safety, obviously we're always concerned about safety. It's a huge component of what we do. So on the bottom axis in this graph, kind of from that same study referenced previously, the deviation from your average speed. So what you're looking at is sort of the lower version of that, and on the y-axis, you're looking at the relative crash rate. So what we're finding is that drivers who are traveling significantly lower than what is the average speed experience a significantly higher number of crashes relative to what we would have from an average speed. So the average speed is right there kind of at 0. The 85th percentile tends to be sort of in that 5 to 7 miles an hour above the average speed. So that is kind of the bottom end of that parabola is where we see sort of the relative crash rate at the lowest. And of course we start seeing speeds that are 10 plus over that average speed. That's where we want to target our enforcement. Wanted to provide a couple of kind of specific examples from locations where we've conducted some speed studies. So this was on 15th Street, Hayes to Hill, and it was originally posted at 30 miles an hour, and we lowered it to 25 in May of last year. So we, as we like to do, we're engineers, we like to collect information, see actual changes if there are any. So what we did was we measured sort of those average and 85th percentile speeds before, and we came back about 4 to 6 weeks later, and that's pretty typical. We completed the follow-up studies for example, in July. We like to wait about 4 to 6 weeks after an actual change so that we can get sort of folks either used to a new speed limit or a kind of a new condition. And what we found was that there was no kind of significant change. The average and 85th percentile speeds, those markers that we like to sort of use on a high-level basis, it didn't change any. So drivers, we changed the speed limit, and drivers did not, more or less, did not do much of anything. So again, if you look at sort of that discrete data for that after condition, so there's the speed limit right there. There's the 85th percentile speed. There's the average speed. And that's that pace. So this is kind of an example of what we see, or how we collect data and how we sort of sort through the numbers, if you will. And these folks, those are the folks we want to target for enforcement. Those 5 samples of the 100 plus that we measured, those are the folks we want to say, you're traveling a little quick.
Josh, so what I hear you say is that the drivers themselves are the ones that help us determine the speed most often, correct?
Commissioner Goldthorpe, correct.
Okay.
I'll give you another example of one we did recently on Floating Feather west of Linden. And this came about from a citizen request. They moved into this subdivision right up here and said, I think folks on Floating Feather, or I think the speed limit is a little quick on Floating Feather based on what I'm seeing. So, public request, we went out and measured. In 2020, this is probably in the spring, early summer time frame, it was posted at 45 miles an hour. And what we found, the data suggested that we should reduce it to 40. So we got in contact with Eagle Police Department, and they said, yep, that sounds about right to us, based on what we're seeing out there in terms of their enforcement and their observations, that 40 miles an hour is a correct speed limit. So we went out beforehand and measured. We got the 80 average of 40 and 85th percentile of 44. The after speed study that we had done about 6 weeks after we changed the speed limit, we got an average speed of about 38, 85th percentile of 42. Now, those numbers seem significant, and in some respects they kind of are. But when we went out in 2019, the year before, and that's not part in the slide, the actual difference in the speed limit that we measured between 2019 and 2020 was actually a little bit higher than that 2 mile an hour difference that we're seeing. So we're seeing more development. Conditions are changing, and people are sort of voting with their feet. They're reducing their speeds accordingly because of that additional friction, those additional homes out there. So in conclusion, I mean, there is a science. I mean, this isn't just picking random numbers out of hats. There is a science to doing this, and there are a lot of different factors that come into play than kind of what you'll see sort of the 85th percentile speed. We're looking at the things like the road characteristics. We're looking at the land uses. We're looking at our crash experience. But also certainly drivers will change their behavior according to changes on the roadway. If we change something, drivers will react accordingly. Enforcement can help, but it has to be consistent. So in conclusion, I want to make sure that we understand that there are myths that we see. We get people who call in. Drivers automatically travel 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. That's not true. If we're setting them appropriately, that's not at all true. Reducing the speed limit without justification results in that same reduction. 15th Street sort of proves that. We reduced it by 5 miles an hour. Folks didn't agree with that. They're staying the same. And of course, there's no science. There's certainly a science associated with it, as I've hopefully proved today. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you might have.
Does anyone have a question or a comment besides me?
Mr. President, I do.
Yes.
Thank you, Josh, for the presentation. I've got lots of questions for you. I really, really appreciate this. I've gotten a lot of questions from regular folks about how do we establish speed limits and how do they put in those requests. So can you be more specific? So if somebody wants to see a reduced or an increased speed limit, do they go through the TELUS, or what are their aspects, or can they kind of share that concern with us?
Commissioner Pickering, there are a lot of different ways they can call us. I mean, they just call the traffic main line.
Okay.
They can use the TELUS system. To give you an example, the number of traffic requests that we get for either a traffic calming request or an evaluation of an existing speed limit, it's probably in the range of about 200 to 300 a year.
Okay.
So we collect a lot of information.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of different ways they can submit a traffic investigation request form that's on our website. They can use the TELUS system, or they can give us a call directly.
And then I've noticed, I mean, so I live, in the West Bench area and right off of Northview. And I know, looking at how the commission approved the Kootenai project, how, you looked at what's the speed that we want for the neighborhood, and let's build the road to support that speed, right? Which I think is a great shift in how we kind of review and look at speed limits. Because if I look at Northview, for example, which was it's an older street, it's riddled constantly with speeding, and the speed limit isn't appropriate for what we think is safer. So I was just curious, I mean, your presentation just really reinforces that whole thing about we build for the speed that we want, and we should be doing that rather than the other way around. Is that still is that the sentiment that you and your coworkers kind of go into this mentality and go into these decisions?
Commissioner Pickering, I think those are valid comments by all means. There's a lot to it. I mean, I hope what I got across today is it's not just looking at one factor. There's sort of a multiple factor analysis that we will take into account. Now, obviously, there are things that we can do from a roadway perspective, but this is where kind of the transportation and land use component really sort of come together, in that we like to rely on things. We oftentimes need to rely on things that are beyond our control when it comes to land use, and making sure that our land use partners are making appropriate decisions when it comes to adjacent development on our kind of collectors and arterials. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that we can do in terms of design, but there are a lot of things that we need to rely on our land use partners to sort of help us out with.
Sure, and I get that. But I think with, what Lisa had mentioned, with Cloverdale, like that, it seems like that was we had full control, it seemed like, what my understanding, to widen that road to accommodate when we probably could have done the things a little bit differently rather than, and keeping the speed as it is and make it safer for kids to walk and bike. So I guess that's my only thing. It's how can we continue to learn these lessons and build for the speed that we want? I mean, especially with your Livable Communities Design Guide, you're really specific about what types of streetscapes align with the right speed limits that we want. So again, I'm just really curious about that and making sure that we do that. Okay. And then what's I love your point about the science and collecting data. I'm a nerd like that too. What's kind of your knowledge of other ways of looking at speed limits? I mean, are there other national guides and other philosophies? I'd be just curious if you're aware of them and kind of what your perspective is on them.
Sure. I mean, Commissioner Pickering, I think that you're going to find, for every engineer out there, you're going to find folks who are just, this is the 85th percentile speed, and some folks have to adhere to that, either by statute, either a state statute, local ordinance, that the 85th percentile speed is what they have to use, and they don't have any flexibility. We don't have that here. So we have the ability to make determinations that are kind of, maybe take a little more a sound approach, a little more round approach for all these different factors that I had mentioned, rather than strictly about speed. So it's not just about speed. It's one of those things where you kind of want to divest a little bit. That it's not just about the numbers. The engineer in me sometimes starts to get a little cringy when it comes to sort of the softer side, but it's reality. It's what we deal with on a daily basis. So we need to make sure that we are taking these other things into account when it comes to sort of the land use applications, the proximity of schools, accommodating as many people, as many different modes as we can on our streets.
Perfect. And then my last question, and I really appreciate that you gave this presentation to the the PAG, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And I know that there's several workshops that go along in the community around speed and designing better roads. I'm just curious, how else do you kind of share this information with our land use agencies? Because I think this is really important information for them, so they know when they go into making certain decisions that impact this stuff, that they know the science behind it.
Commissioner Pickering, every project we do, when it comes to partnering, we usually have representatives from City of Meridian, Star, Boise, Garden City, etc. They're a part of our project teams. So they're the ones that are going to have input when it comes to kind of those specific land use decisions on a given roadway. So they are pretty much always involved in whatever project that we have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, Josh, I'm wondering if, can we go back to your slides that looked at speed versus crash data? I had a couple of questions on that. I don't know if we can get back to that, if it'll take too long to get to it or not, but I was interested to see, it looked like your crash data suggested that drivers who drive at speed significantly below the posted speed limit, or significantly below at least the 85th percentile speed, had more likelihood of accidents than those who were the same distance above that speed. Is that, am I reading that correct? Is that what that graph showed?
Commissioner McKay, that's correct. That's exactly what that graph is showing. So that graph shows kind of more, there you go, share screen. Sorry, 1 second. Share.
You'd just be more likely to survive those crashes at a lower speed.
You're talking about this graph, correct?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what this tends to show is that drivers who are driving significantly slower than the average speed have a significantly higher crash risk. And I think that's if think about driving on I-84. If you're seeing somebody going out to Mountain Home and they're driving 50 miles an hour and you're driving 80, which is the posted speed limit, there's a significant sort of driver expectancy from the person going 80 that 50 is really on the slow side. So that's where you start to see that relative crash risk really increase.
Okay, and that's good, and I think that's important information for the public to be aware of. One thing I have noticed, and of course I have a background as a highway and traffic engineer, and I've done traffic studies and speed studies and so on. And one thing that I've noticed and has become very clear in recent years is as the speed limits on our interstate highways, for example, have been increased, the number and severity of accidents has not gone up. It's actually gone down. Which is quite astonishing. But one thing that I've noticed that has happened is that if you drive on the interstate today, the difference in speeds between vehicles, the pace of the speed of vehicles has diminished, which is a good thing. In other words, when I drive at the speed limit of 80, I don't have a lot of people going past me a lot faster, at say 90. You get a fair number of people going a little bit over, but not nearly what you had in the past. When the speed limit was 65, you get a lot of drivers going 80, 85. And so the difference in speed, the pace of the vehicles on the highway was much greater in the past when the speed limit was lower. And having that pace smaller now has actually resulted in safer roads. Now, it also helps that we have vehicles now that are much better, vehicles are better today than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so the ability to drive at those higher speeds consistently for long periods of time, you can do that better today than you could in vehicles from a generation or two ago. Nevertheless, the basic notion or the basic concern that a lot of people have that speed kills is kind of simplistic and not really the issue. One of the things that was very clear to me from my studies and training in traffic engineering is that it's a psychological thing. Drivers will go a speed that seems to them to be reasonable and safe. Now, drivers can be wrong, and sometimes they are. Most of the time, they're not. And that's why the 85th percentile speed is a speed that people just will drive even if you change the speed limit. And so setting the speed limit based upon what people do instead of what we'd like to control them to do is, in my opinion, the right way to go. And that's absolutely appropriate. And your example from, I guess it was Hill Road, is a perfect example of how people just do, sorry, Hayes Street, yeah. People will drive what seems reasonable and appropriate. And when it comes to reducing speeds, other approaches are usually more effective. For example, on residential and local streets, putting in striping to narrow the apparent lane width has a big effect, because the drivers see the stripes that are narrower and closer together. When a roadway feels narrow, people drive slower. On the other hand, we can have situations where bad design comes back to bite us. I think Eagle Road is a good example of that. The friction along the roadside, the number of driveways and approaches that come into the road, and the proximity of development and so on to the road makes a big difference. And when, Eagle Road is intended to be a high-speed arterial highway, and it's posted with 50 and 55-mile-an-hour speed limits. But the reality is, most times of the day, you can't go that speed on Eagle Road, at least north from I-84, simply because, one, because of the traffic volume, but two, because of the number of driveways and other friction along the roadway. They should have, unfortunately, we're a generation or two too late for this, but when they built that road, it should have been built with frontage roads and with no direct access. But we have all those driveways along Eagle Road that have slowed it down and made it much more difficult, and it doesn't now function the way it was originally intended. And that's the kind of faulty thinking we've got to guard against. Now, of course, that's the state highway, and so ACHD didn't directly, we're not directly responsible for that, but we have situations where we can encourage, in other cases where we can really dictate and mandate that we don't do that kind of thing again, so that we've got, again, like has been mentioned, we design the roads based on their, number one, their classification, what they're intended to do, their function, as well as speeds we want to get. The Commissioner Pickering gave the example of Cloverdale Road, and that's been mentioned a bit. The concern about speeds on Cloverdale Road puts us in a little bit of a quandary because Cloverdale Road is intended to be an arterial. It's not intended to be a high-speed arterial like Eagle Road, but it is still intended to be an arterial road. And if we don't design pedestrian facilities in a way that we can still have the arterial roads that function the way they are intended to function, then we run into troubles. And I think figuring out how to deal with Cloverdale Road is an example where we've got to be creative, but I don't think we can simply say, because speeds are high, that's bad. That's not necessarily the case. We've got to look at how to make these things work and work together, but we've got to make sure that our roadways function the way they're intended to function, because otherwise we're shooting ourselves in the foot, kind of like the way, if you put a speed limit that's too low for what the traffic does, again, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Anyway, those are my 2 cents. Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. It's very helpful.
Any other comments?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, and I appreciate both Commissioner Pickering and Commissioner McKinney's comments. I think that they're very well taken. Most of the streets that we're talking about are streets where people want to walk, need to walk, they live on. 15th Street has all front-on housing. The analysis, of course, that you did, Josh, really has to do with what is the behavior? How do people in cars respond to conditions? And we really haven't used tools to measure how do people not in cars respond to those same conditions when people in cars feel justifiably comfortable driving at a speed that does not feel safe. People not in cars then avoid it. And we see the consequence of that. Or if they can't avoid it, and there is crashes, fatality rates go up the faster the speed. So this is a really good example of why we need those same measurement tools that we have for driver behavior to do behavior of people not in cars, pedestrian and bicycle and people using wheelchairs. Because what happens, and we see this in neighborhoods, these older roads that were just built. And then the 85th percentile analysis says, well, doesn't matter what kind of speed limit you put up there, this is how people will drive. It's not safe. People don't feel safe letting their kids cycle or walk along those streets, even though it might be a route to a school. And ultimately, the value of those homes goes down. People don't want businesses on those streets because people are avoiding them. So it's all those sorts of things. And I think it's real important for us as an agency, as we get these tools that we're going to increasingly use to measure human behavior of people not in cars, to then say, well, it's up to the land use agency, the enforcement agency to figure it out. Actually, we have tools, and we incorporate them into our integrated 5-year work plan. But I would like us to do a lot more working with temporary installations, temporary tools. to model what it would be like if we invested in a more expensive physical installation. And so on 15th Street, great example. I'm really glad you gave that example, because I think it was on 15th that we had temporary installations of curb extensions. And guess what? It actually did slow traffic down, because it brought people further out, and they felt a little bit safer, and drivers were more aware of the visibility of the neighborhood. I think it was 15th. If not, I stand corrected, but there's a lot of areas. I would like this to see and to put in a budget item that I think would be very cost effective, to say these are going to be our temporary installations, and we're going to put them in for a temporary period of time to collect the kind of information we need to see if human behavior changes, not just drivers, but people walking and biking and in wheelchairs in an area. And then we say this works or it's not working before we then say this is what we're going to make for a permanent installation. So I really like the first, this is a first half analysis of what driver behavior is. And I'm looking forward to the implications of the other half or the other side, because so many of the issues of speeding, people don't, I frankly have never received a tell-us or anything on speeding on the interstate. But they do, we get lots speeding on, usually they're on collector streets or even local streets, that have not been addressed as to the comfort of people living, working, attending businesses, going to school along those. And then the issue of the arterial, which is where we tend to lean much more in favor of driving on those. How can we make that? Because those are the critical connections. And as Lisa pointed out, what is the way in which we can make it safe to move across these arterials like Overland Road or Fairview? It's safer within the neighborhoods on either side, but there's a critical connection that needs to be made. And if we don't address it, if we don't provide a safe connection across it, we are shifting those costs to another government agency, another public agency. In the case that Lisa pointed out, that we're participating in shifting that cost. The city does too, shifting that cost to the school district to then pick up the cost of busing kids, when it could have been avoided with the way in which we might have designed a safer crossing and said, maybe it'll slow traffic at the peak hour by 30 seconds, but the trade-off is there's tremendous value. And so there's opportunities to really see and measure the negative externalities of some of the decisions we make on our major arterials. And I agree with Dave. Well, I'm glad it's a state highway, because Eagle Road is just like, there's so many things that could have been done, but weren't, and makes that such a huge, it's basically a wall that goes down the middle of our valley that separates one side from the other. For people who want to walk and bike, basically says if you want to be safe, you got to get in the protection of a car. Thank you.
Mary, any comment or question?
I think we've covered most of the issues. A great presentation, Josh. Good refresher for all of us, and certainly agree with Commissioner McKinney's assessment of Eagle Road. It's kind of what not to do in the future. Totally support the demo projects. We've got a couple that we're talking about currently, and so. But thanks, Josh. Always good to see you. Lots of good info.
Thank you very much.
One final thought or comment, and I'll use an example of something we've done since I've been on the commission. A couple years, 3 years ago maybe, we had a number of phone calls concerning the area on in front of Rocky Mountain High School. And my wife worked there, so it was kind of funny. There were a number of kids either actually or almost bouncing off of bumpers doing stupid things. And so we have maybe 4 hawk signals between just north of Rocky and down to Sawtooth Middle School, as well as 2 intersections. There's not a lot of chance for people to do stupid things going fast. And I think that's what we mean about designing and building for safety, and in particular towards Lisa's comments and concerns on Cloverdale. You know, there's a, I'm trying to think because I don't drive that often, but there's maybe one hawk signal or crossing guard along that whole area, and people are flying down there. And the statistics are pretty profound. You get 9 out of 10 people that get hit going 40 miles an hour, they're dead. And at 20 miles an hour, there's only one fatality, the same group. So if we're going to build a road, then unfortunately we have no choice a lot of the time. There's schools there, but the roads need to be expanded. We need to do something engineering-wise to keep them safe, whether it's putting a flashing signal up a quarter of a mile down the road, say you hit one of these kids, you go directly to jail. I don't know, that's just facetious. But that's part of our job, and it's more difficult sometimes than others. But I think what Lisa brought up is important to consider. We're, you know, and sometimes we have a harder time than others making things happen, whether it's in our budget or whether it's in our anything else. But I keep going back to this. You know, every once in a while over at the Bicycle Advisory Committee, my good friend Wava, who's a teacher over there, and she talks about the kids that bounce off the bumpers there in front of the middle school, where it still needs a hawk signal. And the sooner we get that problem fixed, the better. Just has to be prioritized by us, because we're the ultimate arbiter of all of that. Thank you. If there aren't any other questions or comments, then we have another work session, unless we have two more, but the next one is on the Bicycle Advisory Committee recommendation for our bike and ped coordinator and inspector. This would be a staff position here at ACHD.
Mr. President, Commissioners, thank you. And again, what a tremendous transition on your last comments about how great the Bicycle Advisory Committee is. As for background for the folks, we did come to the previous commission with a recommendation based on discussions we have had with the BAC and our partner agencies to mirror the success of the commission's decision to add an ADA coordinator to the district staff roster. With all of the additional impetus we are putting into bikes and pedestrians, our position at the time was to have a dedicated position, as we have had with the ADA coordinator, that would be the what I'll call the center of excellence, center of gravity, for coordinating all these very important aspects. At that time, the commission did not want to go do that route, again, for all good reasons. And such, the Bicycle Advisory Committee then took that up, and I believe several of the commissioners were on that conference at the time. I know I was, when one of the Bicycle Advisory Committee members stated that having this as an additional duty, military term, was probably not the best aspect of operations. You recently had a presentation from Christy Inselman. Her job is the integrated 5-year work plan. Her job is also doing the Bicycle Advisory Committee liaison. Her job is also running all sorts of different aspects of the district here. So the Bicycle Advisory Committee wrote a letter to the commission recommending that the commission reconsider their thought and approve. You have that authority. I do not. Approve a position at the district to be, again, this center of excellence, center of gravity for all bicycle operations. Yesterday, I sent all of you the proposed, if you want to go down this path, and you can't do it today because this is a work session, not a decision session. But I have sent you our proposed job description, outline of duties, and I think, it's 3 pages long for this. I think you'll find that this position will be quite active if you go down that path. We'll have a tremendous amount of responsibility being on every project team, working through every issue when it comes down to integrating both bicycle and pedestrian points of interest and in order, as our ADA Advisory Committee coordinator has very well done and such. So you wanted to have a work session to discuss this. This is your opportunity, and of course we'll stand ready to support anything that you'd like to do. So, Mr. President, I'd like to turn it back over to the Commission at this time.
Okay, thank you. I was involved in that meeting as well. I think there were at least 3 of us, maybe 4 from, including staff. No, there were probably 6, including staff, that were involved in that meeting. I don't remember really well the discussion we had last time about this particular position, but what I do remember really well is are the statistics, none of which are good, are the statistics that we keep getting regarding the harm that is being done both to life and limb, most of the time by the driving public, not by the people on the bicycles or walking down the side of the road. And I don't know that if we approve this position that it needs to be full-time or part-time. It drives me nuts that we're even asked in this day and age of having our hands tied more and more by statute as to how we can spend our money, that we need to expand staff, because so much of what we're asked to do falls in the area of an unfunded mandate for this or that or the other, and stuff like this that may be really important, we're just left to our own designs, which actually we ought to be. But we could, and I'll try and take care of some of this tomorrow, but we could use a little help balancing our own books the way that makes it not only happy to us but to the public. And I think this is an important consideration. I've been involved with the Bicycle Advisory Committee for too long to think any other way. But we need to have a discussion in the public, not just here, but where we can get testimony before we ultimately make a decision. And I would like the public to help me. And there are people on here. We've only lost 4 people watching this particular procedure since the first of the meeting a while ago. But I would invite your help in a constructive way to help me make a decision on this. Thank you.
So I think, obviously we're not making a decision today, but I'm thinking a lot about Shoshone and a few projects, that are, our projects are becoming more and more complicated. I'm thinking of Kootenai, right? And I think it's really critical that the return on value, I believe, and we can make sure that that's achieved with this position, but I think that the value of having this position would far outweigh the costs. I think it hopefully could prevent us in going into costly fixes after the fact, and we could build it right the first time and have some really, I think it would be great to have somebody internally that can just build on the expertise that already exists and elevate us all and help us design better roads for everybody.
Anybody else?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I had the reservation I expressed to the Bike Advisory Committee. I'll do it here. Is that it's really important, I think, that we see a person like this that helps to transform the whole organization, and not view it as we've checked off this box and they don't actually change. So, for example, a presentation on speeding next year. Josh would go into details on driver behavior and on pedestrian, bicycle, ADA behavior, and how it all integrates with the issue of speed, so that this person this would actually help to transform lots of things. The same thing with inspectors. And actually, our inspectors are doing more and more a really good job of recognizing when they go out and inspecting projects, inspecting activity, that it's not just about how does this impact drivers, it's also how does this impact everybody. And I wouldn't want this inspector aspect to this job to sort of be compartmentalized, that it would actually play a role in enhancing the strength and the effectiveness and the tools that all the other inspectors have. Same thing with the engineers. Engineers would start to think differently about engineering things using data and input, and this person's support to think about engineering things at the very beginning for all nodes. And it doesn't become something that happens somehow separately. So that's my reservation, is the risk always is that by compartmentalizing it, it doesn't become fully integrated through the organization. But I hope in the process of getting that input and the way in which we evaluate it, we are prepared to help the organization transform, because we'll save a whole lot of money that way if we design things right from the very beginning and we build them right from the very beginning to last and to return a really good investment to the taxpayer.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Again, following Commissioner Hansen's comments, I would just ask the Commission to reflect on the impact we've already had across the entire district by bringing one person in as our ADA coordinator. That person now has generated and inspired new training techniques for other inspectors, new concepts to our construction team members when they are briefing construction across the board. So our focus and our vision on this is just that. One person can make a difference. I believe in that very fervently, and I think that again, from the staff's perspective, this would be a great next step in the transformation of the Ada County Highway District, when we actually have that single center of excellence to start. Because I'll be coming back to you at later on in the budget process with requests for maintainers, equipment, the development of the third site, and such. But at the end of the day, we've looked at this very hard. And the job description you have in front of you, from my perspective, is a full-time position and will be probably one of the most sought-after individuals for the next several years that we have here at the Ada County Highway District, working through not only our plans and our projects, but also working with the other aspects of the district to continue forward progress. Again, that's my final thought on that.
Thank you. And I saw Mary unmute herself. Yes.
Yeah, I did. Well, we had this discussion last year, and I would be totally in support of having a dedicated full-time individual for bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. And I was going to point to the positive outcome and the benefits that we've already seen with our ADA full-time coordinator as well. The population of bicyclists is growing. We're constantly getting telesis about different areas that are perhaps deficient and need a little bit more focus. This frees up staff. But I think, and then I'm so appreciative of the BAC weighing in on their input, but I think this is a very valuable position. I don't think we can do it part-time. I think full-time, and I think we will see huge benefits from it. So I do support this.
Thank you. Speaking for myself only, I've already said enough, but if you're going to approach me about to help me make up my mind, please do it with phone, not a text or a thread on Facebook. It's a lot easier to discuss things either in person or over the phone, for me anyway. Thank you. That ends that. Whoop. Someone else say
Mr.
something?
President,
Yes,
I'd like to make a few comments, if I might.
please.
I have to admit, first let me say that the concerns about making sure that we give proper attention to bicycle pedestrian facilities and those concerns absolutely. That goes without saying, and I'm all in favor of that. But I'm not entirely certain that that need merits, growing the bureaucracy, if you'll pardon the phrase. It sometimes there's a tendency in public affairs and in government to, every time there's a problem identified, we create a new position, a new bureaucracy, a new program, a new something. And in these ways, you get kind of things just tend to always increase and get more unwieldy as time goes by. When it comes to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, every project that's designed is reviewed by ACHD engineers and so on. And of course, it's designed by engineers, in the private sector and so on, usually, but of course also designed by ACHD in-house sometimes. The point is, these designers and engineers, when they go about these projects, they have hundreds and hundreds of different considerations that they have to keep in mind with regard to all of the design aspects. For them to include bicycle and pedestrian accessibility and safety considerations as well is just part of the job, it seems to me. And when I look at that, I say to myself, why does there need to be a separate bureaucracy, a separate function just for this consideration, when we've already got hundreds and hundreds of considerations that are just part of the mix that have to be considered? I wonder if perhaps instead of, again, growing the bureaucracy and spending more money on additional personnel, we simply spend a portion of that money on, as need be, additional training for existing personnel to make sure that they identify, that they're aware of, for example, options for pedestrian facilities and bike facilities, that they have more training on these things, and then we can make sure that these issues are addressed without having to go to the extent of, again, creating a new position, going to that additional expense. The current system, it seems to me, can handle these issues. I don't know that we need an additional position to deal just with these issues, and again, grow and encumber the agency more than it already is. At least I think we need to keep that in mind as we're considering this issue.
Thanks, Dave. That's the thing that, it's like, what was it last week, Bruce, that we got a mandate from the state for 3 new positions?
Yes, sir, that is true.
Yeah.
Mr. President, in response, again, Commissioner McKinney raises a tremendous point. But one thing I'd ask the commission to consider, and it just happens we have a night meeting next week, so plenty of the public will be able to participate, because with your concurrence, we'll have this on the agenda because it is an action item. But it's been my experience here at the Ada County Highway District that we have actually done incredibly well in keeping the bureaucracy down. As a matter of fact, as you recall, our overhead rate is 8%. Goes between 6% and 8% over the many years, which I think would stand hugely against any commercial business, any other government agency across the board. The majority of growth that we've had here has been strictly focused on operations. And all of us have taken some hits on that because we do focus on that at the expense of some of the staff members, because we focus on the tooth, not the tail of operations here. But I've also learned that unless you have in the growth of our requirements, the growth of the requests that the community has, the growth of being able to ensure we get this right the first time, if you don't have a standard bearer or flag bearer that is 100% focused on this, sometimes, not much here at the district, but sometimes it gets lost in those 100 different things that go around, and then we get to start over. So the commissioners have made some, again, excellent points on all sides of the board. Our role here today was to bring this back to the commission as a work session, and I'll let you know that we're ready to go if the commission wants us to go on that path and such. And with that, sir, I have nothing else to say, except maybe you want to take a 5-minute break because you have the lawyer coming up next and he's got 50 slides.
I was going to ask that too. You know, one last thing though, and that's again for the public that plans on testifying when this comes before the public, and that is to please take into consideration, out of kindness, if not pity, for the five of us, that, you know, what Bruce said is correct, what Dave said is correct. We have a lot to digest about this. And, you know, you've watched us over the last year decide that we're going to make some changes as to default positions on multi-use pathways, for instance, just to give you one, which takes a lot of the danger out of a lot of what we do for bikes and pedestrians. So please consider all that before you very passionately request one thing or another, and I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
So a 5-minute recess, sir? Thank you.
You better get a cookie.
Yeah, that's what I'm headed.
You're going to need the sugar to get through this. You think so? Oh.
Disconnect the phone from Costello.
You can't do that. You probably want a cookie. You're going to need the sugar.
Well, I was going to ask to reveal myself so
Sure.
In addition to cookies?
Absolutely.
Having a healthy choice.
You bet.
Yeah.
We'll put in a request. We'll get you some. Nope.
Blood sugar level. Can it be?
Clancy, get that chart.
Good,
I mean,
good. I was gonna ask about it.
I've seen it 1,000 times, but
I'm gonna have it on hand.
yeah.
That was good. Thank
You
you for
may,
doing
you
that.
may have more wrecks when you're going slow, but they're a lot cheaper.
Exactly. Well, that's, I mean, kind of digesting Josh's presentation, I was curious about his, like, could he better define what those crashes are? Because they're probably not as hardcore.
Stacy,
Yeah, keep that.
President Goldthorpe, whenever you're ready,
We are ready. Steve is here to explain to us how to stay out of trouble.
Thank you, Mr. President and Commissioners. For the record, Steve Price, General Counsel. I've been asked to yet again provide another information briefing on what you can and can't do. It's riveting. It's long. I'll try and stay within the 85th percentile in terms of speed, but we'll get there.
Sure you don't want to
And if I go too slow, we'll have probably some casualties. So this is kind of a combined briefing. For new commissioners, you guys have been through a lot. I apologize, but I know it's a lot of information to absorb only within about a month of your oath. But we're going to talk about the oath of office, standards of conduct, and ethics. And we'll get going. So, primer on Idaho law, every commissioner and officer must take an oath of office. That's the oath that's within the statute. Subscribe means you sign it, the officer. Oh, the other point I wanted to qualify. I'm going to go over some stuff that many of you have already heard. I will go over it quickly, but I'm only reviewing it because it falls within the parameters of the standards of conduct, and give you the opportunity that if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And there is no such thing when it comes to this stuff. It's actually really important, and there is no such thing as a stupid question. So in any event, failing to take your oath prevents you from becoming, and you guys have all done that. It defines official oath within the Idaho statute. It's an abbreviated. The commission has also, our policy requires you to do that. Our oath is a little bit different. The commission a number of years ago added this language to it, and added really the significance is according to the highest ethical standards.
Steve, how long ago was that?
I actually think it's about 10 years ago. And Commissioner Pickering, the commission at any time can change that. So I'm going to blast through this stuff. So what that means in your oath is that you're going to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Idaho, ACHD rules, regulation, and ordinances. You'll faithfully discharge your duties according to the highest ethical standards, and you'll do it to the best of your ability. Can we get this so I just get the whole slide instead of one line at a time? Okay, all right, thanks. The consequences, Idaho does not have any penalty provision in the state law that if you don't follow your oath, you're going to get nailed, but indirectly there's some serious consequences. Conviction of a felony or public offense involving a violation of the oath creates an automatic vacancy. Also, this provision indirectly relates to it. Whenever an officer is convicted of an infamous crime or offense involving a violation of his oath of office, notice must be given to the officer empowered to fill the vacancy. Failing to honor the oath means that the duties were not faithfully discharged. This is another criminal statute, is a misdemeanor. And here's another misdemeanor statute about failing to follow the oath. And believe it or not, it happens in the state of Idaho.
Steve, would some examples be, for example, examples that come to mind recently are like the Boise County commissioners defrauding the county? Would that be an example of?
That would be an example. Mayor Cole's issues a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Other jurisdictions have more severe penalties. One is punishable by perjury, imprisonment, 10 years. And you can in other states, lose their rights to serve further and the benefits of the office. Anyway, there's just some more examples of other jurisdictions. So it's serious. You take your oath, follow it. Federal law, since we have federal contracts, we have to worry about some of this stuff. Again, they have a different slant on it. Removal of office, a fine, imprisonment for more than a year. If you don't like the law, it can't be a reason not to follow the law. The law isn't always perfect. You're going to learn that as new commissioners, and the existing commissioners already know that. But you have, let's change it. If you don't like it, you've got an effective team at the district and a lobbyist, and we're most certainly, if there's a law that you don't like, or even our own policies and ordinances, if you don't like it, we can change them. So make sure that the reason that if you don't like it, we'll change it, but that isn't a reason not to follow the laws because you don't like it. Now we're going to get into the standards of conduct, back to quasi-judicial legislative proceedings, the open meeting law, serial meetings, ex parte, and commission protocols. We've kind of gone over that already. Okay, a legislative or adopting an ordinance, resolution, or other policies, legislative action. Quasi-judicial is more involving property. You have to have, usually like a development application or some property right. You need to have, the finding has to be based upon an evidentiary record. You guys sit as a judge, and when you sit as a judge, you have to, act like a judge, and that is just the facts and the law, and make your decisions based upon the record that's presented to the entire commission. The commission applies those specific facts and standards provided in our policies. Again, these are parcels of land, access variances, and staff decisions. A lot of people, somebody the other day just asked me, said, well, what does the commission do? And we said, well, they set the budget. They do that. They also set all of our policies, and a lot of the policies are there, but you More importantly, the commission every week, sometimes our policies don't look at every situation fairly if it's applied strictly, and so the commission really is in a position, reasonable people, to apply our written policy or grant waivers and variances. And a lot of these are appeals from staff decisions. And so the legislative end of it is very important. But it has some different requirements than quasi-judicial. We have to follow the open meeting law to discuss legislative issues. You can have those outside of an open meeting without concerns of meeting violations. But if a commissioner does a transparent approach, which is a conservative approach, but it's one that I advise on, is for the commissioner to disclose any communications with the public or third party and encourage the third party to send in written messages informing the entire commission. That way everybody gets the same level of knowledge, even on legislative issues. In terms of citizen advisory meetings, we know we have some commissioners that participate at that level, which is great. Most of those meetings relate to policy, legislative type issues. They're policy recommendations that come from those committees. But at the same time, there's the participation should be modified not to really engage in those because you may indicate a position on a particular issue that's going to be before the commission. So try and temper those. Just remember, you're going to be voting on it. It's great that you're there to listen. You can participate, but I encourage you not to indicate which position you're going to take when it does come before you. That's really, there's no rule against it that would prevent you. It's just that it's, in terms of fairness to the process, it's a good approach. Serial meetings. These are meetings that at any one time involve a portion of a commission, but eventually involve a quorum. The process deprives the public of meaningful opportunity to be involved in the decision-making process. We've had a problem in the past with emails and text messages during commission meetings. Just to remind you, those are public records, and if those are discovered, it will be embarrassing. Serial meetings apply to both legislative and quasi-judicial issues. This is something that came from the Attorney General that kind of describes what a serial meeting is. It involved, I think, the city of Boise. Commissioner contact with other commissioners on a one-on-one basis in an attempt to build a consensus for a position or policy that you wish to advance or have already advanced. So you have one-on-one, which is less than a quorum. It's outside a public meeting. It's a deliberate attempt to build a majority consensus. The public related to a public policy, resolution, or ordinance. So it relates to legislative issues. And it's in an effort to form a policy, build a consensus, and pass resolutions or ordinances to govern. So try and stay away from that. It's embarrassing if you get caught. And it's against the law. Ex parte communications, this really relates more to quasi-judicial proceedings. It's when a commissioner has a communication that's conducted outside the public meeting, and any person trying to avoid those circumstances, remember, we have to have a record and your decisions have to be confined to that record, and all the commissioners should be making their decisions based upon the same facts. These are the situations you have a findings of fact and conclusions of law. So if a commissioner has an ex parte communication, what should you do? You should disclose the details of the communication for the public record and the nature of the communication. Also state that the information you got is not going to affect your ability or impact your ability to be fair and impartial. They should indicate with whom the communication was made, provide a written statement as to the substance of the communication, And the record needs to have all the communications again, and the commissioners need to benefit from all that communication, as I indicated earlier. And again, I encourage you to request the person to send in a written communication addressed to the entire commission conveying the same information. Most people are very happy to do that. So, these are some other issues in terms of privileged and confidential communications. This happens during executive sessions. They shouldn't be disclosed to a third party without prior commission approval, at least a majority of the commission. Nobody has the authority, the director or myself, we don't have the authority to divulge attorney-client work product information. And the commission has to approve that. They can waive that privilege with a majority of the commission. This is particularly frustrating for your attorneys that are providing the advice for that information to get out, and it also affects our ability to adequately defend the district. And it's happened, and it's a tragedy when it does. Exempt public records, there's a whole litany of exempt public records, and those are, you can't disclose those without prior commission. The 3 commissioners approved that. Those are protections that are within and codified by state law. These are within the protocols. These are the miscellaneous provisions. I've gone over this. Here they are. You comply with the protocols, comply with the district's code of ethics. We're going to go over that in a minute. Comply with and enforce the district's personnel policy. Not treat any commissioner employees abusive or unprofessionally. You probably don't know why that ever got done. Not willfully or knowingly circulate public or exhibit any false statement or presentation concerning ACHD commissioners' employees. Not willfully neglect or fail to perform faithfully a duty imposed by law. Not act in an arbitrary and capricious manner. Not commit an unlawful act. Not act inconsistent with his or her official duty, and not violate your oath of office. If you violate some of these standards, you may be punished as prescribed under state law and federal law, which I indicated earlier. But in addition, the commission can adopt a public censure statement admonishing the violation of these standards of conduct. Now, within our personnel handbook, we have, well, one is under state law, under the commissioner or the highway district commissioner's provision, the district is liable and responsible for the action of commissioners and, of course, employees performing their duties, but we have insurance in the event anything ever happens. But in terms of our policy, we have other provisions that you're going to discharge your responsibilities faithfully, willingly, and maintain courteous, friendly, and cooperative attitude towards fellow employees and the general public. And employees prohibited from engaging in any conduct that would reflect unfavorably upon the district service and must avoid any action that might result in or create an impression of using public office for private gain, giving preferential treatment to any person or group, or losing impartiality in the conduct of district business. Code of ethics, here we go. This is good stuff. This really is the stuff that that all of the employees of the district, it's extremely important that everybody treat this very seriously because the public has trust in the government, and whenever there's a situation where there's a loss of trust, it really is a negative for the entire organization. And I mean, if you just look at what happened with Mayor Coles, that is just a situation where they then, after that, had to adopt an entire code of ethics. They reviewed all of that. There was not only the investigations, but it took the city of Boise, and they've done a fantastic job in recovering from that, but it took an enormous amount of effort to get through that. The Code of Ethics prohibits engaging in conduct that is based upon avoiding situations where a commissioner's private interest may affect or appear to affect his or her objectivity, independence, or honesty in performing their official duties, which includes acts of reprisal. Our Code of Ethics formalizes our commitment to an honest and ethical government. It governs the ethical behavior of ACHD commissioners, and of course all of our employees. All employees who accept public employment or office also accept an ethical duty to serve honestly and in the public's best interests. While each commissioner must comply with Idaho's ethic laws, the commissioner must understand that the ethic laws are a minimum standard. Violations of these can result in fines and incarceration. These are different than the ones that I talked about earlier. Our standards mirror with Idaho's law. However, ACHD has higher standards in some situations, and again, violations can result in discipline. We're committed to helping commissioners comply with the Code of Ethics. We're going to, this presentation is to increase your awareness and understanding of the ethical conduct required of you during your office. We have a Code of Ethics, and I believe with the new commissioners, I handed out the Attorney General's booklet on Idaho Code of Ethics. But even then, in addition to providing the information, you most certainly, there'll be situations that you're not sure, and this presentation is going to tell you how to address those in seeking advice about ethical issues. So, ethics are standards. Ethical standards are your best friend and you're the citizen's greatest ally. Ethics standards tell you the rules on how to avoid breaking them. Ethics standards protect you against unjustified accusations of ethical impropriety. Why have a code of ethics? Well, they ensure that commissions act professionally. Commissioners can influence the public's confidence and trust in the governance of ACHD. Our code of ethics is to foster confidence in ACHD's governance, and preserving public trust is central to the operation of any government. Personal ethics are an individual matter. This is what your parents did. They basically set up your own value system, and they really form the foundation of our interaction with others. It's self-enforcing, and as the director says, ethics is when what you do is when nobody's looking, and that you do the right thing. Again, there's criminal misdemeanor liability for a legal ethics violation. It hits your personal checkbook, fines up to $500, and a calendar of jail up to 90 days. This is a legal analysis, kind of a framework of all of the ethics laws that apply to you and ACHD employees. There's a lot of statutes there's a lot of pages there, and there's a lot of fine print, but we're going to break that down to you. And by doing that, what we're really trying to do is just whenever you get in a situation, when your stomach tells you something's not right, you at least know that maybe you need to try and get some guidance on it. This particular code that's in red, Title 40, Chapter 13, and 14 deals with surplus property. And this is unique to highway districts. It really is the result of a number of years ago, commissioners used to make sweetheart deals on surplus property with their friends and selling it. And it was bad enough where the state legislature had to prohibit commissioners or employees, their families, indirectly or directly from participating in the sale of highway district property. And all of our professional employees, they have their own professional ethical standards. And again, these laws are minimum ethical standards, but our policy goes beyond the minimum standards. So, our code of ethics, again, incorporates the legal rules and standards that we just reviewed. It describes kind of the general value system and ethical principles and specific rules required by law. And really, this is the 6 categories we're going to go over hopefully quickly. 1, conflict of interest, which is a big one, acceptance of gifts, confidential and proprietary information, use of district assets. You cannot purchase surplus property directly, indirectly, or at an auction. We've had issues in the past with that. And the appearance of fairness doctrine. This doctrine is where we go beyond the minimum standard set by federal and state law. So conflict of interest. The taxpayers of Ada County expect
Steve,
you.
real quick question. On the acceptance of gifts, what's the threshold again? Is it $25 or $35? What is
We're
it?
going to get into that, but it's $50.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
So in terms of conflict of interest, taxpayers expect you to act for their benefit and not in favor of a few individuals, friends, or yourself. Conflict of interest situations often come up during the course of public service. We've got a $130 million budget. We do a lot of purchasing, contracts. There's a lot of people that are trying to influence you, and they come at you. They will, and it's important that you know how to avoid those kind of situations. As a general rule, you must avoid situations where your private interests, financial or otherwise, may affect or appear to affect your ability to be objective, independent, or honest in the performance of your official capacity. There's 2 different types of conflict. There's actual conflict of interest and apparent. Actual is when you might take an action or make a decision that would affect your financial interest, those of a family member or your business. Apparent conflict of interest does not affect your financial interest, but calls into question your ability to be objective and independent. Actual conflict of interest, they violate Idaho law. The commissioner must take, the commissioner must take an official action, decision, or recommendation, and the effect of that action or decision or recommendation would result in a private pecuniary benefit to the commissioner as a decision maker, to a family member or a business interest. Now, what is pecuniary? Pecuniary could be monetary, it can come in it's really just a personal benefit.
Can I ask a question? Mr. President?
Yes.
Steve, that point about the private pecuniary benefit, isn't it also true that there have been cases where conflict of interest was found when the decision made actually resulted in a pecuniary damage to the individual involved, but it was still considered to be a conflict of interest? Haven't those cases also existed?
I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry, the volume is... Could you repeat that question?
I'm sorry, let's see. Yeah, have there been cases where a public official made a decision and the effect of the decision had a specific private effect on the official, but it was actually a negative effect, and yet it was found to have been a conflict of interest situation? Does it always have to be a benefit?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pickering, it has to be a benefit. But if you're put in a situation where you think that it's going to impact you one way or the other, the prudent course of action is to declare a conflict of interest. And by the way, there are some cases in which this is just a reporting that you have a conflict of interest. And depending upon the degree, you may, in some cases, be able to participate once you've disclosed it, and then there'll be other cases that you may not. And we've had those in the past, so again, it really gets down and needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. One thing that happens is that if you seek legal advice from the ACHD attorney, and we tell you a particular course of action to take, and you take that action, then you have immunity from any future prosecution. And so it's really important to seek advice and work with us, and we'll most certainly get you in the right direction. But that's a good question. But again, if you're in a decision-making or recommendation process where you're going to take an official action, and you think that it's going to impact you in any way, I would really appreciate you talking to us. Apparent conflict of interest sets the bar a little bit higher. It prohibits conflicts that raise questions about your ability to be objective and independent and fair and impartial. And these come up. What do you do if you have a conflict of interest? You must disclose that by our policy to the director and the commission president. You should discuss the conflict with our HR department and legal department, and all steps should be taken to prevent you from having to deal with the conflict. And again, as I indicated, you'd have immunity. By the way, if you don't follow the legal advice, then you don't get the immunity. De minimis, here we go. What is a conflict that may be de minimis? That's if in any decision, recommendation, or official action you take, the pecuniary benefit, usually financial, if it's de minimis, if it's less than $50 from a personal, professional, or business contact, it does not undermine your ability to be impartial. Your interest in a contract would be so de minimis if it was a remote interest. An apparent conflict is de minimis if your personal interests are so small that it would be unreasonable to question your impartiality. Now, this rule was set up by the legislature, and it's still on the books today. There's been an effort, I think, in the past to increase the $50 to, because of inflation, of course. But the idea is our legislators, they like free meals. And so this helps them, it protects them against that. Oddly enough, the statute does not say whether it's once a year, once a day, once an hour. It doesn't describe how many times the $50 applies, but the other provisions within the de minimis rule would apply.
Steve, could you provide an example besides the $50 rule? I mean, what would be a small conflict of interest that would be de minimis?
What would a small conflict of interest be?
Yeah, what would be an example of that? And I'm not going to pronounce the word right. De minimis.
De minimis.
De minimis. Okay. And then versus a normal conflict of interest that would.
Well, let's say that let's say you're going to make a decision regarding access to somebody's home. And that somebody's home, that person mows your lawn. And that person decides that he's not going to charge you for mowing your lawn. It could be a personal gift. One of your friends, you may, before or even during, could bring you a bouquet of flowers that's less than $50. I have received a gallon of Crown Royal, which is in excess of $50, and most certainly before I drank half of it, $50 worth, it didn't undermine my ability to be fair and impartial, but after I had a half a bottle of it, I think it probably did. That's just a joke, but we've received turkeys during Thanksgiving for all the employees. We've received hams. And the district we've adopted specifically to certain employees that make decisions, like in development. Or our vendors will do trips. They'll offer all of these different things. Of course, what are they trying to do? They're trying to seek your favor in making a decision. And so when we look at these de minimis gifts, just so we get around the whole mess of it, and it happens, and they really shut down over time, is the one person shares it with the entire district instead of taking that one gift. We just spread it around, and then it really takes away the directness of the influence over the decision. It's made a big difference. But people will hand out cash cards, free tickets to games. They come in all kinds, free tickets to race car tracks. There's a whole mess of stuff that people will think about and throw at you.
So Steve, so like for instance, obviously it's different when a gift is delivered to ACHD, but so say someone's offering a commissioner tickets like that. If you don't accept it, is that still a conflict of interest, or is it once you accept it?
Madam President, Commissioner Pickering, no, I mean, if you don't accept it, it's not a violation. If you accept it, then we would appreciate, or before you accept it, you contact us, we review it. In a lot of cases, we'll say, oh, it's not a big deal. And then we send you a text message, or an email, and you have that. And that provides you immunity. I mean, we, HR and the legal department, we get a whole host of these. They happen regularly. And we make the call on those. Again, people are very creative in attempting to try and influence your favor in your decisions. Just be careful. If you've got a big development application that's coming, and anybody within that whole process tries to give you, alcohol, things like that, just contact us and share the wine with us. Here's gifts. They're prohibited from soliciting or accepting. Now, sometimes people say, gosh, it'd be nice if you give me this. Soliciting, accepting, or receiving a gift, benefit, or payment for services, advice, assistance, or conduct customarily exercised in your official capacity. Again, it's a decision, it's the commissioner's authority, it's an exercise of discretion in interpreting a regulation, ordinance, policy, standard, inspection, official transaction, preparing bills, purchase orders, payment, or contract or claim. I'll give you a recent one that happened to me. You remember Doug Bates? The Table Rock Road?
Okay.
He contacted me, and through our conversations, we both came to understand that we both like duck hunting. And Mr. Bates has an amazing duck hunting club with memberships ranging about $10,000. And so this was right in the swing of this, and he said, hey, why don't you come with me sometime? It wasn't going to affect what was going on. I really am not in a decision-making role, but I had to decline that very generous offer just based upon the appearance of fairness. And I don't make decisions, I offer advice, but those are the type of things. It most certainly wasn't intentional, but at the same time, it was the right thing to do. A gift really is anything of value you receive without giving anything in return. Includes meals, tickets, events, travel expenses, services, rebates, discounts. Now, we a lot of employees will have a vendor offer all of ACHD employees 30% off. Joseph A. Bank, of course, everything's on sale there. And they'll do that, but those most certainly Joseph A. Bank isn't going to have any decision or anything at the highway district. It does not going to affect, we don't buy suits here. We buy tires. So that's okay. But we've had one of our tire service companies has offered the same kind of a deal for all of our employees. And of course, they're a vendor here. And so we always inquire as to whether that discount is also offered to the public at large. If it is, fine. If not, we're a little bit more sensitive about it. Why? Because there's a perception that that discount is intended to win our favor. Most of this kind of stuff happens with public work projects and purchasing public property. Which gifts do you have to refuse? You or your family members cannot accept a gift if you ask for the gift for any reason. The gift is related to your position as an elected official. So, for instance, my dad owns a water company, and he gives me presents all the time. But the Highway District and ACHD have, and his water company, they have transactions, a utility, and so he wants to give me a gun. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to take that gun. But and I always call a conflict on any time there's anything within that relates to Capital Water. But this would be a situation that the gift does not relate to my position as an employee. It's just father-son. The giver expects something to influence your vote or action or judgment. Again, the gift exceeds a value of $50. The gift has a value less than $50, but there's a risk that the gift would undermine your ability to be fair and impartial. And in no case can you accept cash in any amount, including gift cards. So what can you accept? Well, look, the list is big. The legislature made it. The giver doesn't expect to undermine your impartiality. A reasonable person wouldn't assume the gift would undermine your ability to be impartial. It has nothing to do with your elected status. If it's from an individual you had a pre-existing relationship not related to your elected status, it's a campaign contribution. It is trivial with a value of less than $50, a lot of times swag, hats, pins, other items for advertising. And it has a trivial benefit with the value, again, with less than $50, food, beverages, meals, or tickets. If it's incidental to a personal, professional, or business context and won't involve your ability to be fair and impartial. Why? Because the gifts are trying to win your favor and appear to favor the giver of the gift. You should perform your official duties without being influenced or seemingly to be influenced by gifts. Again, this gets into the appearance of fairness doctrine. Use of district funds. ACHD's expenditure shall only be expended for legitimate district business. Commissioners have a fiduciary duty to protect and conserve all ACHD property and only use it for authorized uses. And you're prohibited from using district funds or assets for personal gain. Pretty straightforward stuff. Purchase and sale of property. Again, this is that code provision. Commissioners and their families cannot purchase surplus ACHD property, both directly or indirectly from ACHD or a public auction. We've had employees show up and actually purchase vehicles, and we've had to reverse those transactions once we found out. The auctioneer typically can't identify who's an employee or who hasn't, but we haven't had an issue for a number of years, I think. Confidential information, exempt public records. You're prohibited from using or disclosing confidential information or exempt public records that would result in a personal gain or private interest. You're probably thinking, well, what's that? Well, mailing lists, selling design plans to a subdivision that somebody could use as a shortcut to designing another subdivision, selling a traffic study on one development that somebody could use in an adjacent development. They can usually get it by public records request, but you can't get a personal gain from it. Outside employment, our employees could moonlight if their other employment does not interfere with the performance of the duties with ACHD. And it doesn't result in a conflict of interest. We have some employees that moonlight, and some are realtors, and we just tell them not to do real estate in Ada County. They can in Canyon County, but it can't interfere with their duties. Commissioner's employment may require accrual on any matters that result in a conflict of interest. We've had some issues in the past where some have worked for a company that was going to be a vendor, or one of the commissioners worked for a particular developer. And so that is a situation that you need to avoid. Again, don't be afraid to ask. You're prohibited from being a party directly or indirectly in any contract with ACHD. You're prohibited from financial interests that conflict with the performance of your duties. You're prohibited from making unauthorized commitments. Campaign promises is where people get into trouble. I tell you what, if you do this for me, when I get elected, I will do this for you. They do come out. It's a small community and people talk. You have to act impartially and prohibited from giving preferential treatment to anyone. Endeavor to avoid actions creating appearance of violating the law or ACHD policies. You're prohibited from attempting to influence the award of a contract to a particular vendor. And vendors are going to ask you, by the way. I'll fall over if you don't have that happen to you. You're prohibited from conspiring with a vendor to influence the award of a contract. This is serious stuff, by the way. This happens a lot in Idaho. And you're prohibited from violating a competitive bid or procurement policy. We have enough safeguards, I think, in our procurement department where we have checklists, believe it or not. But we will certainly make sure that we try and keep this with the full integrity of a process. Questions about ethical code. Anytime you have questions about a specific situation or action that violates the code, you should discuss that again with the commission president, director, HR, or the legal department. You're encouraged to contact the department if you have any questions about ethics. These are easy to avoid. Recognize the situation early. Err on the side of caution. When your stomach's telling you something ain't right, that's the best time. When in doubt, disclose and seek guidance. Be aware of perceptions, legal versus public. Assume everyone knows all your various connections. Again, this is a small county, believe it or not. A little disclosure goes a long way. Final thoughts. It's important for the commissioners to embrace the highest standards of ethical behavior. Our code of ethics identifies the values and ethics necessary to support our commitment to the public's trust. Trust is really central to our mission of public service. Each day we must strive to meet the values of honesty, integrity, respect, responsibility, and good citizenship. Comply both with the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Avoid situations that create actual or perceived impropriety or unfairness. And with that riveting presentation, I'll stand for any questions. Did I tell you could do it? Oh, I did tell you could do one or two things, but other than that, it's pretty much you can't do. I hope this is the last one I have to do that.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me ask questions
I'll
along the way.
probably
absolutely.
ask you one offline.
Uh-oh.
It's not at all. All right. Well, we're done. All the meetings are adjourned. Go home. Go to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Steve, I was serious.